Chapter 782. Come here. Seeing Fang coming over from a distance, Li Yi said angrily with a sullen face. Fang came over with a defeated look. Li Yi looked at him and said one word. Suddenly he said in surprise, what happened to your butt? Only then did he find that Fang's walking posture was a little strange, and his butt was more than a circle bigger than usual. Fang lowered his head and said in a low voice, I accidentally fell when I was walking. Not to mention one fall, even 10 falls or 100 falls wouldn't have such an effect. Li Yi had a deep understanding of this, so he didn't expose him. He asked, why didn't you remind me when you saw it just now? Fang raised his head and looked at him in confusion. What did you see? Li Yi raised his hand and pointed to his cheek. Fang suddenly realized and said, I wanted to say it just now, but you said to talk about it later. I thought you did it on purpose. On purpose what? Fang looked at him and said with reverence, you deliberately annoyed the second Mississippi. What do you call this? Loosening the reins in order to advance by retreating? Leaving a woman's kiss mark on his face, giving the illusion that the son-in-law is with someone outside. Well, it's not an illusion. Anyway, it's deliberately provoking the second miss to make her feel a sense of crisis, so that she will become more active. Is that right? This was the conclusion he came to after thinking about it. He only felt that the son-in-law had reached an unfathomable realm that he was far from reaching. Especially when the second miss saw that there was another woman's lip mark on his face, he felt that the son-in-law's realm was even deeper now that he could still stand here and talk to him. Imagine if it was him who had a woman's lip mark on his face. It was simply unimaginable. Fang looked at Li Yi, thought for a moment and said, however, this method can only be used once. If it is used too often, it will have the opposite effect. With second Mrs. temper if she is provoked too much. You know, son-in-law. Also, when you come back from Miss Zheng's place, you'd better look at yourself in the mirror to see if there's anything messy on your face and neck. Sometimes, it's useless to look at yourself in the mirror because your body will smell fragrant. You should take a bath and change your clothes. Or you might as well prepare a new set of clothes. You can change into them when you go there and change back when you come back. That way there won't be any other smell. This is just a bit of experience. Young master, please think about it yourself. I still have to go to the shops in the city. Li Yi stared blankly at Fang's back as he left. He suddenly had a feeling that things remained the same, but people had changed. The simple and honest voice and appearance were still there, but old Third Fang was nowhere to be seen. From Qing and prefecture to the capital, it had only been a little more than a year. Fang was no longer the Fang of the past. Just now, Mississippi Lu left without listening to his explanation, which made Li Yi even more perturbed. The old emperor was about to move out of the palace and live in Hibiscus Garden. At that time, the eldest princess would naturally leave the palace often. Hibiscus Garden was not far from here, so there would be plenty of opportunities to meet in the future. What if Mississippi Lu fought with her when they met? At that time, who should he help? It was wrong to help anyone, it was useless to help anyone. The main culprit of all this was the eldest princess, who had suddenly changed inexplicably. If she wanted to apologize, then apologize properly. Why did she kiss her? She left after kissing her and said that nothing had happened. He was a dignified county marquis, the #1 scholar of the Jing kingdom, and Dr. Lu. Was he such a casual person? Was he someone who could casually accept a kiss from a woman? The proud Lolita held Yongning's hand and jogged over from behind. She asked excitedly again, Teacher, if father really wants to leave the palace and live in Hibiscus Garden, can we not return to the palace in the future? Li Yi nodded. If he doesn't agree, you can just act coquettishly. Isn't that enough? The proud Lolita blushed and hugged his arm. She twisted her body and said coquettishly, but I don't know how to act coquettishly. Hearing her voice, Li Yi felt his bones soften. He bent over and picked Yongning up. He frowned and said, Why have you become so light recently? Did you not eat properly? The young girl shook her head violently and immediately said, No, Yongning is very obedient. She eats properly every time. Good girl? Li Yi patted her head. Good girl, do you want to give your brother a kiss? Yongning's little face was blushing as she pressed her lips against the side of his face. The proud Lolita bared her fangs and brandished her claws, shouting that teacher could not be biased. It was the first time in recent months that the morning court was held for 2 days in a row. Before the morning court, many officials were wondering if His Majesty's body was fine. Was he going to return to the previous situation of the morning court? Only a few people knew that after today's morning court, they would not have to come here for a long time. The first thing that His Majesty announced was related to the flood control. What was strange was that the matter that had been discussed by the court officials yesterday and had not come to a conclusion had already come to a conclusion today. The imperial court sent another flood control official from the Imperial Navy. At the same time, 4 imperial physicians from the Imperial Physician Bureau accompanied him. They urgently transferred 300,000 taels of silver from the Ministry of Revenue and rushed to the disaster area. In recent months, His Majesty was very generous. In the past, when he transferred money from the National Treasury, he had to go through a series of procedures and it was extremely difficult. However, these days the National Treasury seemed to be full, and the allocation of funds was straightforward and decisive, which surprised many people. The flood control did not give the officials time to discuss and passed quickly. Next, a eunuch officially announced that Li Yi, the Marquis of Jianghu County, had made great contributions to the country, had the talent to govern the country, and was conferred the title of Honorable Minister of Gold and Purple Ribbon. Regarding this matter, His Majesty said yesterday that it would be discussed later, but today he made a decision without discussing it. Of course, the imperial court was in an uproar again just like yesterday. Not to mention the great contributions, Li Yi, the Marquis of Jianghu County, had indeed made great contributions to the country, but to say that he had the talent to govern the country and the way to stabilize the country was pure nonsense. How could a young man in his early 20s, who had never really entered the imperial court and had never put forward any meaningful political opinions, be qualified to receive the special honor that most civil officials could not pursue in their lifetime? Your Majesty, this is absolutely not appropriate. This is a serious matter, Your Majesty, please think twice. How can Li Yi be qualified? Your Majesty, you must not spoil him too much. Seeing that many officials stood out, Emperor Jing gestured for them to calm down. After the imperial court quieted down, he looked in a certain direction and asked, Minister Su, what do you think? As soon as he finished speaking, a white-haired old man came out of the crowd, and all the officials made way for him. Lord Su was a veteran of 3 dynasties and had been in politics for decades. He was devoted to the country and had a high prestige in the imperial court. Yesterday he was the one who firmly opposed His Majesty's decision. Many people suddenly felt relieved. It seemed that His Majesty had considered the opinions of these old officials. They were insignificant, and His Majesty would not ignore Lord Su's words, would he? The people who stood out to oppose instantly felt that they had a backbone. The old man walked out of the crowd and bowed, saying, Although Marquis Li is young, he is a hero of his generation. Your Majesty, you have a discerning eye, and you have obtained the pillar of the country. I congratulate Your Majesty and the Jing Kingdom. The old man stood in front of the crowd, and the officials behind him who had firmly opposed this matter just now froze. Their eyes were full of doubts and puzzlement. Had Lord Su become muddle-headed? Hadn't he firmly opposed this matter yesterday? It had only been a day, how could he change his opinion so completely? What about your integrity as an old official of 3 dynasties? This was not right. Chapter 783. After Lord Su spoke, Emperor Jing nodded and looked to the other side. Minister Wei? A middle-aged man came out, bowed and said, I congratulate Your Majesty. This was a minister in charge of reviewing and refuting the emperor's edict. He had the power to return the emperor's edict and reject the memorials of the officials. Among the 4 ministers in charge of the emperor's edict, Lord Wei was the one that His Majesty valued the most. Emperor Jing turned his eyes again. Minister Yang? A Ren Huang of the Secretariat, who had been valued recently, stood out and said loudly, I congratulate Your Majesty. Emperor Jing looked to the front. Prime Minister Shen raised his head and said with a smile, Your Majesty is wise. The originally noisy imperial court gradually quietened down as several high-ranking officials spoke one after another. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. The officials that His Majesty had just named were all important officials who had great power in the court. They had no personal relationship with County Marquis Li. Yesterday, they did not agree with His Majesty's reward for County Marquis Li. But today what happened to them? The officials who were opposed to this matter and planned to wait and see immediately gave up some ideas. To be able to change the minds of these court officials, there must be an inside story to this matter. And more than a dozen people who were sharp and strongly opposed to this matter just now stood there in a daze. At this moment they finally felt a kind of feeling called loneliness and loneliness. At this moment, Emperor Jing looked down and said again, Where is Minister Qin? More than a dozen people heard this and were all shocked. They looked in a certain direction at the same time. Yes, Prime Minister Qin. They still had Prime Minister Qin. No matter what, Prime Minister Qin was on their side. At this moment they no longer hoped that His Majesty could change his decision. They only hoped that there could be a leader who could be their backer and help them withstand the pressure from other officials. Prime Minister Qin looked a little absent-minded. After leaving the palace yesterday, he directly returned to the mansion and repeatedly thought about what Li Yi said. He didn't see any guests and he didn't sleep for a whole night. Until this morning, some ideas about the state affairs that were very vague in his mind were clear enough to appear on the paper. He raised his head and said with a slightly hoarse voice, "Your Majesty is wise." More than a dozen people behind him looked at him in a daze. There seemed to be thunder dancing in their minds. Prime Minister Qin, what are you talking about? The Marquis of Chang and County Li Yi and the King of Shu were like fire and water. Anything that was beneficial to him in the imperial court, they would definitely stop it. Didn't Prime Minister Qin's words make him a traitor? They were starting to get a little blurry. The two prime ministers as well as several high-ranking officials of the imperial court spoke in unison and finally set the tone for this matter. There was no longer any opposition in the imperial court. The attitude of these ministers, including Prime Minister Qin, naturally made everyone suspicious. However, at this moment it was not appropriate for them to ask. As for the others, they were not just suspicious. The change in attitude of several ministers and Prime Minister Qin's position made them into clowns in the court today. Their outlook on life and the world collapsed, and they began to gradually reflect on the position they stood in. He was the youngest minister since the founding of the country, and the most favored minister of His Majesty. At least, when the country was still under His Majesty's control, making an enemy of him was tantamount to asking for humiliation. At that time he who had made enemies in almost every corner of the court would not have a good ending. Ministers who were favored by the emperor had never had a good ending. However, they soon realized that it would not take a few years, a few months, a few days or even less than a few hours. The day they had been waiting for had arrived. After Li Yi was conferred the title of Minister of Jinzi Guanglu, His Majesty announced one thing. Because His Majesty was ill and needed to recuperate, the morning court would be suspended indefinitely and he would move to the temporary imperial residence in Hibiscus Garden. The affairs of the court would still be led by the two prime ministers. At this time, His Majesty did not summon the King of Shu back to the capital. Above the two prime ministers, the one who decided the affairs of the court was not a certain prince, but the eldest princess. This really did not make sense. The eldest princess often participated in the affairs of the court, such as promoting the new marriage law, the establishment of the women's college, and the matter of the academy a few days ago. In fact, if it had been a year ago, these things would still have been inconceivable to them. The harem was not allowed to interfere in the affairs of the court, not even the eldest princess. This was an ancestral rule. However, in this year too many things had happened in the capital. Their thoughts and views had also changed accordingly. Now that they thought about it, they still did not understand how the eldest princess had gotten to where she was today step by step. This seemed impossible, but it was already the truth. And now she had taken another big step forward. This was the regent, the princess regent. This was unprecedented and extremely absurd. For the time being, no one in the court had spoken because they were waiting for others to speak. Prime Minister Qin, Prime Minister Xin, the various officials of the 3 provinces and 6 ministries, they would not agree. They would not allow such an absurd thing to happen. This was not proper at all. However, the reality surprised them once again. The scene of the ministers collectively remonstrating to the death did not happen. Even the imperial censors collectively fell silent, as if they had reached some kind of tacit agreement before the morning court. Regarding this matter, only a few scattered officials spoke. It seemed that they had not expected the situation in the court to be like this. They spoke very tactfully and then returned to their seats. Another major innovation that had not been done since the founding of the country was born in His Majesty's hands. Some officials who thought that they had waited until spring found in despair that this year's winter seemed to be colder than before. His Majesty at most favored County Marquis Li. As a ruler, a wise ruler, he had the most basic bottom line. However, the eldest princess, in the entire court, who did not know the relationship between County Marquis Li and the eldest princess. The two of them had known each other in Qing'an Prefecture. Tianfa was created by County Marquis Li, but it was the eldest princess who presented it to His Majesty. It was said that when the eldest princess concealed her identity to be a constable in Qing'an Prefecture, County Marquis Li was a county lieutenant, who knew what was going on between the male superior and the female subordinate. Moreover, after coming to the capital, The relationship between the two was even more obvious to everyone. They were both the three heroes of the capital. When the officials went up and down the court, they often saw the two appear together. After the establishment of the academy, the Women's Academy was established. The two academies were adjacent to each other, and both of them were the heads of the academies. To say something inappropriate, County Marquis Li and the eldest princess were basically wearing the same pair of pants. Thinking of these things when some officials walked out of the hall, they felt that the sunny sky outside had become gray. Fortunately, the eldest princess was only acting as the representative of the court. If His Majesty appointed other princes, they would be suspicious and frightened. However, the eldest princess was a princess after all. No matter how outstanding she was, no matter how much His Majesty valued her, she was only a woman. As long as she was a woman, she could never threaten that position. Moreover, from the beginning to the end, they had never thought about that matter. At this time, as the officials walked out of the hall, some gossip finally came out from some people. It was said that after the court ended yesterday, when His Majesty, the two prime ministers and several important officials discussed the state affairs in the imperial garden, County Marquis Li and the eldest princess were also present. At that time, on the state affairs, the two of them showed talents that shocked and even convinced the emperor and several officials. Just now, Lord Su said that he was an outstanding talent of the generation and the pillar of the country, which was the reason. And Prime Minister Qin, Prime Minister Xin and other officials did not oppose it, which was probably the same reason. Lord Su and Prime Minister Qin were both elders of the imperial court, with decades of political experience. The person that could shock and convince them, everyone couldn't help but wonder again. Did County Marquis Li really have the talent to govern the country and the way to govern the country, as the imperial edict said? Thinking of what happened in the court just now, they didn't doubt it anymore. After all, the attitudes of the two prime ministers and the ministers could not have changed so quickly. His Majesty also had no reason to suddenly announce that the eldest princess would temporarily take charge of the state affairs. The only explanation was that they were really like what the rumors said. Their views and methods on state affairs had convinced the people present and made His Majesty completely relieved, so he decided to temporarily let go of the state affairs. Thus, the officials, including the two prime ministers, didn't oppose His Majesty's decision at all. Thinking of their ages, many people sighed dejectedly on the way out of the court. A pair of evildoers. As officials in the same imperial court, it was inevitable that they would compare with each other, but the result was really despairing. Chapter 784. When it was late July, the weather started to turn cold. News came from the south that the flood had subsided and the flood was temporarily eliminated. The officials sent by the imperial court strictly followed the regulations issued by the imperial court. They built temporary residences and settled down the victims. Every day they provided porridge and rice. There was no large-scale civil unrest. As for the epidemic after the disaster, there was also no outbreak. There were many cases of diarrhea, but it was quickly controlled and did not worsen further. Although the post-disaster reconstruction work still needed a long time, the impact of the flood this time was indeed much smaller than before. It did not affect the hearts of the officials so much. The scale of the emperor's relocation from the palace was very large. It lasted for a few days. The empress and a few favored concubines in the harem also followed him to live in Hibiscus Garden. Of course, the imperial court continued to operate as usual. Some important political matters, after being reviewed by the two prime ministers, would be sent to the palace and handed over to the eldest princess to make a decision. If the three provinces had no objections to the eldest princess's decision, it would be carried out. If there was a huge disagreement, the memorial would be sent to Hibiscus Garden for the emperor to make the final decision. Of course, until now, no one questioned any of the princess's decisions. In just a few days, some officials completely understood why the emperor would make such a seemingly ridiculous decision. A problem that the minister could not solve was sent to the eldest princess. Within a day she would get a perfect solution. Other than being amazed, it also made many people feel ashamed. Evildoer, there was really an evildoer in this dynasty. The eldest princess was busy, so Li naturally had nothing to do. Rui's due date was early November. It was only about 3 months from now. Even though she was a grandmaster, she was still protected tightly. In case of an accident, she was not allowed to leave the mansion. Anyway, the house was big enough. There were mountains and rivers and the scenery was not bad. It was a good place to have a baby. It was not enough to have Xiao Huan to take care of her. Mississippi Lu had not gone out for many days. She stayed at home and occupied Rui. At night, Li Yi would also be driven out by her. The space in the inner house was not big. It was specially arranged by Li Yi according to the layout of the Willow Leaves village. She drove him out and did not allow him to sleep in her room. Li Yi had only two choices. One was to make do with Xiao Huan, and the other was to sleep in the outer house. The former was almost ruled out by him without hesitation. Xiao Huan was no longer the young and inexperienced girl she used to be. She had not fully matured yet. The night was long and Li Yi did not want to make himself suffer. They were now inseparable from Rui. The familiar women of Willow Village often came to talk to him, but they had to avoid talking to him. Li Yi felt that he was redundant. He lay in the yard, basking in the sun and drinking tea. This was the ideal retirement life. After calming down, he had enough time to think about some things. Since a long time ago, he had been laying the foundation for the eldest princess. Now he had finally seen some results. The next thing to do was to wait. Many things needed enough time to ferment if they wanted to achieve the desired effect. Although no matter what kind of preparation they had made, the final decision was still in the hands of the old emperor. But when her weight in the court became more and more important, to the point of breaking through a certain critical point, it was possible to break some conventional ideas. As for the King of Shu did not have to worry at all. The person involved could not see clearly. Perhaps only those who were in the same boat as him would use self-hypnosis to deceive themselves when they had no other choice. With the old emperor's temper, it was impossible for him to watch the imperial power fall into the hands of an idiot. Otherwise he would not have made so many moves against the Cui family. Not to mention the other princes, even compared to Li Han, the King of Shu did not have any advantages. Think about it, more than a year ago he was still the most powerful prince in the capital city. It was really not easy for him to get to where he was today step by step. Lying comfortably on the rocking chair, he was in a state of relaxation. Just when he felt a little sleepy, he was awakened by the sound of hurried footsteps. Fang rushed in from outside and said, "Young master, bad news." "What's the matter?" Li Yi sat up from the rocking chair and asked. Fang handed something to Li Yi and said, "Young master, take a look at it yourself." It was a greeting card. Greeting cards were usually given to strangers or strangers who were not that familiar with one another. He had received many such greeting cards in the past, but this time it was different. Li Yi put down the card and asked with confusion on his face, "Where is she now?" "In the front hall." "Let's go." Li Yi pondered for a moment before walking out of the room. He slowly walked to the front hall, stepped into the hall, and cupped his hands to an old man who was sitting inside drinking tea. "Prime Minister Qin is busy with official business. How do you have time to come here today?" He did not say anything like, "I'm sorry for not coming out to meet you," or "Your presence brings light to my humble dwelling." There was a clear sense of alienation in his words. Prime Minister Qin actually handed over a visiting card and personally came to visit, which was naturally beyond Li Yi's expectations. No matter what, he and the Qin family and Prime Minister Qin had an irreconcilable and antagonistic relationship. Prime Minister Qin had invited him once, but they parted on bad terms in the end. This time he actually came in person. "Dr. Li, please don't blame me for coming rashly." The old man put down the teacup, stood up and said, "Last time in the Imperial Garden, Dr. Li talked about the tax reform. This old man still has some things that I don't understand, so I specially came to explain. I hope Dr. Li will not be stingy with your guidance." He said Dr. Li in a calm tone as if he had completely ignored Li Yi's age. As a veteran of 3 dynasties, there were not many people in the entire court who could be treated like this by him. Li Yi's gaze stopped on Prime Minister Qin's face for a moment, then he nodded and said, "I don't dare to give advice, just treat it as an exchange. Prime Minister Qin, please sit down." Prime Minister Qin nodded, sat down again and said straightforwardly, "The tax system of this dynasty mostly follows the previous dynasty, but at the end of the previous dynasty there were many military towns, and they refused to obey the court, so the tax system introduced is not suitable for this dynasty. Although there have been several reforms in the past few decades, this old man thinks that the current tax system still has great defects." Today's conversation was completely different from the one in the Qin mansion. Prime Minister Qin seemed to have completely forgotten his position, and the questions he asked were all about the tax law and economic reform that Li Yi talked about in the Imperial Garden that day. In the process of their conversation, Li Yi unexpectedly found that Prime Minister Qin also had a deep understanding of this. Although some parts were still very vague, the general direction was correct. He even filled in many details that Li Yi did not mention that day. Li Yi could see that these things were not put forward in a day. In other words, he had been exploring these things that were suitable for the current system reform of the Jing kingdom for a long time. However, due to limited knowledge before this, he only had hazy ideas, but at this time these ideas had gradually begun to surface. Li was very clear that for people in this era, it was very rare to be able to think of those things that were ahead of time. Moreover, his understanding of the Jing kingdom was far beyond his imagination, and his words often hit the nail on the head. Li seemed to have always underestimated this old man. After offending the prime minister of a country, he had always been prepared to accept the other party's revenge, and had several sets of plans to deal with it. However, Qin had suffered losses time and time again, and the king of Shu had gradually lost power. Prime Minister Qin had never taken any action against him. This was not common sense, and Li could not figure out the reason, let alone see through Prime Minister Qin. Including today when he took the initiative to visit, he did not talk about grievances, and only talked about state affairs, which made Li have a new understanding of the old man in front of him. Chapter 785. About 10 years ago, this old man realized that there was a huge problem with the tax system of our dynasty. After writing the last page, Prime Minister Qin put down his pen and stopped writing. He raised his head and said, "In the past 10 years I've pushed for tax reform several times, but all of them ended in failure. In the end, I was too embarrassed to mention this matter to His Majesty. I just had some vague thoughts that I didn't dare to bring up. These days I've been thinking about what you said in the Imperial Garden that day. If you were born 10 years earlier, 5 years ago, if I could hear what you said, there wouldn't be so many twists and turns in the imperial court and the people these years." Prime Minister Qin looked at Li and said calmly, "Lord Su is right. You're the hero of your generation. I'm not as good as you." Li didn't be modest and didn't continue because Prime Minister Qin obviously had something else to say. "You're unparalleled in poetry and painting. You've reached the peak of calligraphy. You're proficient in torture and business. You created Tian Fa, offered horseshoes, repelled the enemy, started arithmetic and got rid of vermin." Prime Minister Qin seemed to be very familiar with Li Yi's past. "I also know that you've turned the Qi kingdom upside down. The crown prince and the third prince of the Qi kingdom are fighting fiercely for the throne. The imperial court is unstable and people are anxious. You've made countless contributions to our Jing kingdom. When I was your age, I didn't pass the imperial examinations and was still worried about my future. But you have already been conferred the title of Duke and Marquis, and you are the youngest minister in history. No wonder His Majesty favors you." Being praised by an elder, Li Yi blushed slightly and felt a little embarrassed. It turned out that he was so outstanding. He couldn't see it usually, but "You are too young?" Prime Minister Qin looked at him with a serious expression and said, "The tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. When things reach an extreme, they will move in the opposite direction. Since ancient times, the favored officials of the emperor rarely have good endings. Moreover, do you know whose interests will be lost in the end with those reforms you mentioned? The old emperor's greatest enemy was some of the major clans. The measures he proposed naturally wouldn't let those people have an easy time. If not for this, the old emperor would not have trusted Emingzu to handle the state affairs. Your existence is the blessing of His Majesty, the blessing of the people." Prime Minister Qin stood up, looked at him and said, "I hope you can remember what I said today." Li looked at him and asked, "Why?" What he said was naturally from the standpoint of the two of them. Prime Minister Qin had no reason to say such words to him, nor did he have any obligation to do so. Why did he say these words today? "I am the master of the Qin family, the Prime Minister of the Jing Kingdom, the Prime Minister of His Majesty, the Prime Minister of the people. If this reform can be carried out smoothly, the country will be rich, the people will be strong, and the people will live in peace." Prime Minister Qin looked at him deeply, cupped his hands and bowed deeply. This bow, on behalf of all the civil and military officials in the court, on behalf of the people of the Jing Kingdom. It was already too late for Li Yi to dodge. In reality, by the time he reacted, Prime Minister Qin had already straightened his body and was walking out the door with large strides. At the door, a certain Water Bureau official who had just been brought in by Fang stood in a daze. He rubbed his eyes and after confirming it, he couldn't help but be petrified on the spot. When Li Yi walked out of the mansion, a carriage had already started off into the distance. He looked in a certain direction for a long time and began to understand why those old stubborn people in the court were so stubborn. Unfortunately, Prime Minister Qin was Prime Minister Qin, and the Qin family was the Qin family. After a while, He turned his head to look at the Water Bureau official behind him and asked, "What is the matter, Junior Supervisor Su?" The official looked in a certain direction, swallowed a few times and then said, "Concerning the compilation of the commentary on the Water Classic, Minister Chang had me ask Lord Li, Duke Chen Fu. You said that Prime Minister Qin went to the Li Fu yesterday and even bowed to that Li Yi?" Chen Chong looked at the official in front of him and frowned. "Are you sure you didn't see wrong?" The official shook his head with a bitter smile. "It shouldn't be wrong." The news came from the Water Bureau. It said that the junior supervisor of the Water Bureau saw it with his own eyes. This lowly official investigated this morning. Yesterday Prime Minister Qin did indeed go to that place. Prime Minister Qin, what is he doing? Qin Chong frowned. Although they all belonged to the King of Shu's faction in terms of division, they and Prime Minister Qin did not belong to the same camp. The group of civil officials led by Prime Minister Qin and the officials and nobles led by the Cui and Qin families had the same goals, but they almost never interfered with each other. Moreover, Prime Minister Qin had a high position and great power. His thoughts were hard to guess. The power in the court that leaned towards the King of Shu was already far from what it was in the past. Could it be that even Prime Minister Qin, below the Assistant Minister of Revenue, Tsing Shichen, thought for a moment and said, "This matter may not be as the rumors say. County Marquis Li is a minister of golden honor. It is not impossible for Prime Minister Qin to find him to discuss court affairs." Qin Chong raised his eyes and said, "Is there a need to bow when discussing state affairs?" The hall immediately became silent. After a long time an official sighed and said, "His Majesty temporarily released court affairs. For Her Highness, it was originally a great opportunity. She could have used this opportunity to return to the capital and take charge of court affairs. But who would have thought that His Majesty would completely entrust court affairs to the eldest princess? Our petitions to summon Her Highness back to the capital have all been rejected by His Majesty. Her Highness's situation in court is becoming worse and worse. If this continues, I'm afraid," Qin Chong nodded and said, "the most important thing right now is to have Her Highness return to the capital. Tell me, what methods do you have?" The few people thought for a moment and then began to speak. Noble Consort Chui's birthday is approaching. His Majesty places great importance on filial piety. It is reasonable for Her Highness to return to the capital at that time. After Her Highness's birthday we can think of a way to have Her Highness stay. We can say that she is ill and stay. At that time, we can unite the court officials and ask His Majesty to have Her Highness replace the eldest princess in governing. This method is feasible. What does Minister think? Qin Chong nodded. Just as he was about to speak, someone walked in from outside and said in a small voice, "Second Master, Miss has returned from visiting her family." Hearing this, Qin Chong's face immediately lit up. He stood up and waved his hand at the people. "I have important matters to attend to right now. We will discuss Her Highness's return to the capital later." Finishing, he hurriedly left, completely ignoring the stunned expressions on the faces of the people in the hall. Everyone watched as he quickly left, their hearts like 10,000 horses galloping. What matter could be more important than this? Didn't he just say that the most important thing right now was to have Her Highness return to the capital? In the garden of the Chen estate, Qin Chong looked at the white-haired woman and asked with a smile, "How is it? Is Aunt well?" The white-haired woman nodded and said, "Her body has always been healthy." She even asked about big brother and second brother. She turned her head to look in a certain direction and said, "Second brother still has matters to attend to. The Lord seemed to be waiting over there. It's all a small matter. It's not important. Let them wait for a while." Qin Chong waved his hand and said, "Third sister, your birthday is approaching. How do you want to celebrate it?" "Tell second brother and second brother will help you." The white-haired woman shook her head and said, "Birthdays have to be celebrated every year. Second brother doesn't need to make such a big fuss. It's enough for our family to be together." Qin Chong hurriedly waved his hand. No, birthdays only happen once a year. It has to be celebrated, it has to be celebrated." Chapter 786. Rui's position in the family was unquestionably the most important. The two old madams treated her like a treasure, and the women in the family usually surrounded her. On the contrary, they were guarding against him as if he was a thief. Today the old madam took her to the old house, saying that she would let the ancestors of the Li family see her and ask them to bless her. Li let them go. Mississippi Lu and Xiao Huan also went, leaving him alone in the house. Li walked out of the room and saw the sloppy old man and Fang sitting cross-legged in the yard. The two of them had been inseparable recently. Every day they would sit cross-legged and motionless under the sun for a few hours. Li even wondered if there was some kind of martial art that could make people photosynthesize like plants and increase their power. He walked to the porch. The sloppy old man opened his eyes and asked, "Going out?" "Where to?" Li waved his hand and said, "Just walking around." The sloppy old man nodded and stood up. He kicked Fang, who was sitting cross-legged, to the side. "Prepare the carriage. We are going to Willow Lane." "Are the rumors true? Prime Minister Qin, he treats you." In the small yard of Willow Lane, Zheng Zumo looked at Li Yi in disbelief. More than 10 years ago, before the Zheng family had experienced that great change, Prime Minister Qin was already the Prime Minister of the dynasty. At the time, she only knew that the Prime Minister was a very, very high official, much higher than her father. Prime Minister Qin was a veteran of 3 dynasties and had students all over the world. He was respected by all the officials in the court. In the entire Jing kingdom, the only person who could make him bow was the current emperor. But recently, the story of Prime Minister Qin bowing to the Marquis of Chang'an County, the newly promoted minister of Jinzi Guanglu, had already spread through the capital in several versions. This matter had recently spread like wildfire in the capital. Li Yi thought to himself that if it weren't for that big-mouthed bastard from the Admiralty, he wouldn't have gotten into all this trouble. Both he and Minister Qin knew what that bow represented, but in the eyes of outsiders, it was very inconceivable. Li Yi shook his head and said, "I bowed, but it's not what you think. I didn't bully the old man." Zheng Zumo looked at him worriedly and asked, "Why did Prime Minister Qin go to you?" "He supports the King of Shu and you and the King of Shu, this." Li Yi threw a piece of osmanthus cake into his mouth and said, "Prime Minister Qin had some political issues that he couldn't figure out, so he came to me for advice. You know, the old man couldn't move easily, and it wasn't easy for him to come here. I explained it to him in detail and then he understood and bowed to thank me. That's about it." Miss Zheng rolled her eyes at him. What kind of person was Prime Minister Qin? He had been an official for many years and was proficient in political affairs. Why would he ask him about these things? However, since Li Yi said it so easily, she gradually relaxed and no longer asked. A burst of light footsteps came from behind. Ruoqing put a small bundle on the table and said, "Miss Lu is about to give birth, right? I have nothing to do these days, so I made some small clothes. If you don't mind, you can give them to your child to wear in the future." Xiao Zhu muttered, "What do you mean by having nothing to do? You clearly work very late every night." Rui was due to give birth in 3 months, and the two of them hadn't started preparing these things yet. Rui knew some needlework, but no one in the family would let her do it herself. Li opened the bundle. The small clothes were very exquisite, with fine stitches and very diverse styles. There were several sets of clothes for boys and girls. He smiled and said, "Ruoqing is clever with her hands. It just so happens that we don't have to prepare them." As he spoke, he picked up another one from the pile. The stitches were crooked. It didn't look like clothes at all. It was clearly a few pieces of sewn cloth. Compared with the other clothes, it was like heaven and earth. Li picked it up in surprise and asked, "This?" For fear that Li didn't know, Xiao Cui, who was standing behind Zheng Zumo, immediately reminded him, "This was made by our young lady. No one will think you're mute if you don't speak." Zheng Zumo looked back at her and grabbed it from Li Yi in a panic. She explained, "I just sewed it casually. It's not for you. Maybe Sister Ruoqing accidentally put it in." Xiao Cui hid a little further and said, "It's obvious that young lady's fingers were pricked many times by needles to make this dress." Zheng Zumo wanted to stand up and cover her mouth, but her hand was caught. Li Yi looked at the few red spots on her fingers and frowned at her. He said, "Miss Ruoqing is clever with her hands. Why do you want to join in the fun? You don't know how to do needlework. It's better if you don't do these things in the future." With her hand held by him, Zheng Zumo's pretty face was slightly red. She lowered her voice and said, "Other than this, I can't do anything else. Young lady, you can still have children even if you don't know how to make clothes." Xiao Cui stood behind her and reminded her. "So, Cui." Zheng Zumo suddenly pulled her hand back from Li Yi's hand. She gritted her teeth and looked at her fiercely. Xiao Cui let out a scream and ran away quickly. Another figure with a red face quickly stood up and chased after her. The two chasing figures disappeared behind the moon gate. Li Yi looked at Ruoqing and said, "It must be very tiring to make these things." "Thank you." Ruoqing shook her head and said, "I haven't done it for a long time. I'm a bit rusty. Just don't laugh at me." Li picked up a piece and looked at it repeatedly in his hand. He smiled and said, "It's very beautiful. I like it very much." He didn't say thank you or anything like that. They had been together for a long time. There was no need for such things between the two of them. "Has everything been okay recently?" Li put away the clothes, including the one that couldn't be called a dress, and then looked at her and asked. As a boss, he was clearly incompetent. The Li family had too many businesses now. He couldn't take care of everything. She had always been in charge of the businesses that radiated out from the brothel. Without her, many things wouldn't be so smooth. Li estimated that he would be in a mess for a while. Everything is going well in the brothel. The situation in the capital city has entered a period of stability. The situation in the other prefectures is also relatively stable. Wan Ruoqing nodded and explained the situation in the brothel to him. Then she thought of another thing. But what? Li looked up at her. Wan Ruoqing thought about it and shook her head slightly. "A few days ago something strange happened, but it's nothing. They probably mistook me for someone else." She looked at Li and asked with a smile, "You're going back soon, right? I still have some osmanthus cakes in my room. Take them back with you." "There's no hurry." Li waved his hand and said with a smile, "There's no one at home. I'm planning to eat here today." Wan Ruoqing was stunned. Then she stood up and said, "Then I'll go prepare. Let's go together." Li got up and walked in the direction of the kitchen. After a while, Xiao Chui appeared at the door of the kitchen with her hands covering her butt. She looked out and said in surprise, "Li, you're eating here today." Li nodded and said, "Come and wash these dishes." Xiao Chui happily took the dishes and went out. Soon a figure walked into the kitchen. Zheng Zumo looked around and asked, "What can I do?" Li turned around and didn't speak. He just mouthed something. After a moment of confusion, Zheng Zumo immediately realized what he had just said. Her face instantly turned red. Chapter 787. Sure enough, the atmosphere would only be better if there were more people around. Xiao Chui was always so enthusiastic and kept putting food into his bowl. The food in Li Yi's bowl had piled up into a small hill and he was a little stuffed. He had to remind her next time to be a little less enthusiastic because he actually couldn't eat that much. "Let's go." Li Yi rubbed the soft flesh on his waist that was still aching. He stepped into the carriage with a smile on his face and waved his hand. Fang and the sloppy old man sat on both sides of the carriage. The sloppy old man looked back and said in a low voice, "Don't you think your son-in-law's smile today is very lewd, isn't it?" Fang smacked his lips and said, "Today's meal was very sumptuous." With the son-in-law, no matter where he went, he would never treat his mouth badly. Before the sloppy old man nodded, a foot stretched out from the carriage and kicked Fang off the carriage. The sloppy old man glanced at him and sneered. "Young man, you will be at a disadvantage if you tell the truth these days. You should weigh your own strength first." After saying that, he moved 3 feet to the side lightly, making Li Yi's kick miss. It was noon when he returned home. Li Yi got off the carriage and thought about where he should go for a free meal in the afternoon. He saw a carriage parked at the gate of the mansion. Rui and the others came back at night. The carriage looked very ordinary, but such an ordinary carriage would not be parked here. There was not even a guard at the gate. Li Yi's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that his house was broken into? In broad daylight, there wouldn't be such a daring thief. Li Yi walked into the house and went straight into the inner courtyard. He immediately saw someone lying on his rocking chair, rocking happily. When he stepped into the courtyard, the old emperor sat up from the rocking chair and waved his hand. "This chair is comfortable. Come, put it away. When you leave, move it back to Hibiscus Garden for me." Li Yi stared blankly at the 2 guards carrying away his precious rocking chair. His premonition just now was not wrong. In broad daylight, the sky was clear and the house was indeed broken into. The old emperor tilted his head to take a look, then walked over and said with dissatisfaction, "What's going on? It's not easy for me to visit your family, but there's no one at home. Where have you been?" Li Yi's face revealed a look of astonishment. "Stealing, no, robbing and doing it in front of the owner? What's wrong with this? Were all emperors like this?" Li looked at him and said in a daze, "Your Majesty, this is... all right, don't say anything else." Jing Emperor waved his hand and said, "Prepare another table of food like the last time. Shanning and Yongning are about to finish school. I will go pick them up and stroll on the street for 4 hours. After 4 hours, I want to see the food ready. Otherwise, I will tell your wife that you went out to fool around with other women while she was away." "Your Majesty, what are you saying?" Li smiled and said, I went out to do something, not to. The old emperor took 2 steps closer and sniffed fiercely. He raised 4 fingers at Li Yi and said, Rose, Jasmine, and 2 women who didn't use perfume. For women. And if I remember correctly, you have 2 female friends in Willow Lane. The other 2 should be their maids. Do I need to continue? Your Majesty, you mentioned what to eat today. Is it the same as last time? I will go and prepare it now. Even a dog's nose was not so sensitive. Li cupped his hands and walked straight in the direction of the kitchen. The reason why he promised him was because he pitied this old man. He had lived for a lifetime and only now did he realize the joy of being human. It was definitely not because he fooled around. After relieving the heavy burden, the old emperor looked less and less like an emperor. Not only did he rob in broad daylight, but he even did such inhumane things like threatening an official. If this was known by future generations, they would criticize him to death. Where was the caretaker who recorded the emperor's words and actions? This part must be recorded. Forget it, it was better to leave this part out. Although his moral character was corrupt, his complexion was indeed much better than before. His illness had a lot to do with his mood and fatigue. If he could live in a comfortable environment, he would be able to greatly prolong his life. However, things were always like that. Since someone had removed the burden, naturally someone had to carry it. The eldest princess's complexion did not look good. Being an emperor was an extremely exhausting task. Even martial arts masters could not bear it. This was also one of the reasons why those diligent and wise monarchs in history did not live long. 4 hours was not a short time. There was still time to save an hour for cooking. Li made some necessary preparations before lowering his head and asking, How do you feel? Emingzi leaned against the kitchen door and looked up. What do you mean? These days you have to deal with all kinds of political affairs personally. It must be very tiring, right? She lowered her head and said softly, Father has always been like this. His Majesty doesn't have to do everything by himself, Roland said with a smile. As Li chopped vegetables, he said, The court pays so many officials, but they do not just take their salary and do nothing. I guess that whenever those people encounter any difficulties, they will ask you to make the decision. In the long run, even a grandmaster will be mentally and physically exhausted. You have to limit the number of reports that are sent to you every day and have the Minister of State check them. Other than those major matters, don't just send any reports to you. Minor matters to the court, but to a family of 3, it may be a matter of life and death. Emingzi shook her head and said, How do you differentiate between major matters and minor matters? Important matters that concern the lives of a family of 3 will naturally be handled by the local officials. Li looked at her and said, You are the Empress. What you are exercising now is the power of an emperor. Important matters that concern the fate of the country should be decided by you. Emingzi looked at him and said, Why don't you help me? Li was startled. He lowered his head and murmured, Where were we just now? All right, speaking of how to cook this fish, do you think it should be steamed or braised? Xiaoning likes to eat braised fish. Steamed is good for His Majesty's health. He looked up at Emingzi and asked, Why don't we steam half and braise the other half? Emingzi looked straight at him and said, Speaking of which, you will enter the palace to help me. Li nodded and said, Sure enough, steamed is better. After all the preparations were done, there was no need to rush. Li washed his hands and wiped them clean. He walked to the courtyard and stood in front of Emingzi. He looked straight into her eyes and asked, Now tell me, do you like what you have done these past few days? The eldest princess looked at him and said, Whether I like it or not, someone has to do it. I'm only asking if you like it or not. She thought for a while, then looked straight into Li Yi's eyes and nodded slightly, I like it. A smile finally appeared on Li Yi's face. With her words, he had a reason for everything he had done in the past and in the future. The weight on his chest was lifted. Li Yi felt that his eyes must be shining at this moment. Even he himself felt that it was a bit dazzling. Then he realized that it was not his eyes that were shining, but the jewel embedded in the autumn water in Mississippi Lu's hand that was shining brightly under the sunlight. At the door, Mississippi Lu held her sword in front of her chest and looked straight at him. She asked, What did she say she liked? Chapter 788. What did she say she liked? Although Mississippi Lu's tone and expression were calm, only Li Yi knew what kind of waves were hidden under this calmness. Even if he was not afraid of a crooked shadow, what he said just now, if taken out of context, was indeed a bit ambiguous. Li Yi looked at her and braced himself to say, This, I can also explain. Mississippi Lu glanced at him, looked at Emingzi and said slowly, You come with me. After saying that, she turned around and walked straight into the moon gate. The expression on Mingzhu's face was also very calm, and she followed leisurely. This is between us. As Li Yi followed, Mississippi Lu's voice came from the front. His footsteps stopped outside the moon gate. In fact, there was nothing much. The eldest princess only needed to explain clearly to him, so there was no need to be nervous. After all, Mississippi Lu was not an unreasonable person. She was usually unreasonable only to herself. Somewhere in the inner courtyard, the figure at the front with the sword stopped. Mingzhu walked over, kept a few steps away from Mississippi Lu and said calmly, "He just asked if I like the affairs of the court. I said I like it, that's all." "I know." Mississippi Lu turned around to look at her. "I heard it from outside." Mingzhu looked up at her and asked, "If that's the case, why did you call me here?" The hickey on his face that day, it was you who left it, right? Mississippi Lu looked at her and asked calmly. Mingzhu met her eyes and her expression did not change and said, "That was just a misunderstanding." "I don't believe there was any misunderstanding." Mississippi Lu looked straight into her eyes and said, "I'm just giving you a piece of advice. Don't forget, you are the princess of a country. You too, it's impossible." Mingzhu was startled and a smile quickly appeared on her face and she looked at her and asked, "Are you saying this for your sister or for yourself?" "What do you mean?" "Whatever you mean is what I mean." The two of them stared at each other in the air, and there seemed to be the sound of metal clashing. Same old rules? Old rules. Li Yi felt that it wouldn't take long to explain this matter. It had already been a quarter of an hour. Why hadn't the two of them come out yet? After waiting for half an hour, he finally couldn't bear it anymore and walked in. He quickly passed through the two moon gates and saw Mississippi Lu standing with her back facing him. The Princess Royal was standing opposite her, her chest was heaving up and down, her cheeks were slightly red, and there were fine beads of sweat on her forehead. He took 2 quick steps and stood between the two of them. Then he turned around and looked at Mississippi Lu. She was also flushed, her chest was heaving up and down, and she was sweating profusely. Looking at the two of them, could it be that they were avoiding him on purpose and had a fight in secret? Mingzhu adjusted her breathing and said slowly, "Your heart is unstable." Li Yi's eyes widened. He was extremely surprised. Could it be that Mississippi Lu lost just now? In a fight between masters, victory or defeat was determined by a hair's breadth. If one of them was bitten by a mosquito, ate too much, or had her period come, it would affect their performance. Logically speaking, it was common for people with similar strength to have wins and losses in a fight. He and Mississippi Lu often lost when sparring, which was very normal. The problem was that Mississippi Lu did not have her period today. In the past, she had never lost when sparring with the Princess Royal Highness. This was the first time she was at a disadvantage. It was going to be troublesome. A loss is a loss. Half a move is also a loss. There's no reason for it. Mississippi Lu didn't seem to care about this matter. She turned around and walked inside. After a few steps, she stopped and turned back to ask, "I'm going to take a shower. Do you want to join me?" "Together?" Li Yi was stunned. Then he said with some embarrassment, "I don't think that's a good idea." Everything had a process. He was a conservative person. Such an open-minded thing, his heart still couldn't accept it. It wasn't until Mingzhu turned around and stared at him for a long time that Li Yi finally understood. He quickly nodded and said, "Yes, there's a hot spring at the back. You two were just sparring and sweating all over. Go take a shower and change your clothes. It's time to eat later." When he first decided to buy this mansion, it wasn't just because of its environment and location. There was actually a spring there and it was even warm. In winter he could soak in it, hug women on his left and drink warm grape wine. It was definitely a great enjoyment in life. Before moving in, Li Yi ordered people to renovate the place. Not to mention 2 people, it wouldn't be crowded even if 10 people soaked in it. In summer it could even be used as a swimming pool. Okay. Since she had invited, Mingzhu naturally couldn't reject. They were both women, so it wasn't a big deal to bathe together. If she rejected, it would seem like she was afraid of the other party. Seeing the two of them walk to the back, Li Yi sat on a stone bench at the side. His heart finally relaxed. It was good that everything was fine. It seemed like the misunderstanding from last time had been resolved just like that. Mississippi Lu was more understanding than he had imagined. He looked back. He forgot to ask just now. He didn't know if the two of them needed a back rub. Her Royal Highness couldn't possibly serve others, and Mississippi Lu wasn't someone who would wait on others. Should he find 2 maids? Not long after this thought appeared, he saw the Princess Royal walk out from inside alone. "You finished bathing so quickly?" Li Yi looked at her in surprise. Didn't they say that girls needed at least an hour to bathe? She went in and came out in a few minutes at most. No matter how fast she was, it shouldn't be this fast. Emingzu sat on the other side and said coldly, I've never bathed with others before. I'm not used to it. I'll go in after she comes out. This was obviously a lie. That Tsundra Lolita often bathed with her, and when she went in, her expression was calm. When she came out, she was obviously unhappy. It was definitely not as simple as being not used to it. Unless, Li looked at her up and down, and his eyes finally stopped at a certain spot. He seemed to understand something. There was no harm if there was no comparison. There was nothing wrong with bathing with the Tsundra Lolita. After all, she was still a child. But with Mississippi Lu, the harm was a little big. Li instantly figured out the crux of the problem. Women were always particularly sensitive to certain parts of the body. When a gaze fell on her, Emingzu only felt uncomfortable all over. She turned her head and looked at him coldly. She asked, I didn't have enough fun just now. Why don't you spar with me again? What do you think? Should this fish be steamed or braised? Li stood up from the stone bench. As he walked outside, he muttered to himself, how about sweet and sour? When he walked to the door of the kitchen, his footsteps stopped. He looked back and wondered, who won? Chapter 789. Li thought about it carefully and felt that Mississippi Lu had won. Because the two of them were similar in strength, there had been no clear winner in many competitions. Mississippi Lu might have fallen behind due to her bad mood or some other reason. The next time the Princess Royal was in a bad mood or needed to entertain her best friend, Mississippi Lu might have won. In other words, the chances of them winning were 50-50. On the other hand, the Princess Royal had lost completely. Mississippi Lu was more sophisticated in that aspect. It was a one-sided victory. If there were no accidents, she would never be able to make a comeback. The Princess Royal was the most pitiful. Li decided to treat her better and make one more soup today. Mississippi Lu had just finished showering and changed into a loose outfit. Her wet black hair draped over her shoulders, adding color to the entire courtyard. Li had already prepared all the ingredients. He planned to start cooking when Shanning and the others were about to return. He looked at Mississippi Lu and asked, Didn't you go out with them? Why are you back? Mississippi Lu pushed her hair behind her shoulders and said, There are some things over at the Lu Alliance that I need to deal with. Then hurry up and go. She was the chief of the Lu Alliance, so sometimes she would be busy. Li said casually. You want me to go out that much? Mississippi Lu crossed her arms and looked at him calmly. Li suddenly felt that he should have come back after having lunch at Willow Alley. What I mean is. Li looked at her and said sincerely, Go early and come back early. I'll wait for you at home. Men were creatures that liked the new and hated the old. The Emperor was no exception. Some time ago he often called her into the palace to eat with him, but because the Tsundra Lolita peeled 2 prawns for him before eating and Yongning personally fed them to him, he was disqualified from the table. She said that she was willing to sit at the same table as him. She thought that Mississippi Lu wasn't as pleasing to the eye as he was. The two of them had eaten so many dishes but no one was fighting over them. Li saw Princess Royal walking over and sitting down. He asked in confusion, Why are you here? Emingza looked at him and raised an eyebrow. I'm not welcome? There was an old saying, Don't talk while eating, don't talk while sleeping. The ancients were not deceiving. Li lowered his head to eat. It was not wrong to listen to the ancients. The academy has run into some problems. There aren't enough books. If it was just the capital there would be enough, but once the academies are built everywhere, books and paper will be a big problem. Many of the engravings of books are in the hands of the aristocratic clans that pass down their legacy through poetry and literature. This includes the majority of the paper shops in the Jing Kingdom, which are also firmly controlled by them. After Princess Royal finished her words, Mississippi Lu glanced at her and said lightly, Let's eat. We can talk after eating. She picked up the chopsticks and put a piece of steamed fish in Li's bowl. The fish is good, try it. Li almost dropped the chopsticks in his hand. He raised his head and looked at her blankly. Second Miss Lu actually picked food for him. This was the first time in history. He was overwhelmed by the favor. He nodded in a daze. Just as he stretched out the chopsticks, there was another piece of spicy chicken in his bowl. Princess Royal took back the chopsticks, looked at him and said, This is also delicious. Try it. Li looked at the food in his bowl and the other 2 people looked at him. In one's life, one had to face many choices. Two different choices often meant two different lives. So he had to learn to be generous. He couldn't have fish and bear's paw at the same time, but he could have steamed fish and spicy chicken. Lee decided to give it a try. The fish was picked up by Mississippi Lou, and the chicken was picked up by Princess Royal. It was wrong to eat either one first. For others this was a very difficult choice, but not for him. He took a piece of pancake and rolled the two pieces of meat in at the same time. "Thank you." He stuffed the pancake into his mouth, swallowed it, and looked at the two women gratefully. The next moment he grabbed his neck and ran to the kitchen in a hurry. Fish bones stuck vinegar. This meal was delicious, but it was all sour. When he sat back at the table, the steamed fish was no different from the sweet and sour fish, and it was the kind with too much vinegar. Even the rice in the bowl was sour. Lee put down the chopsticks and said angrily, "I drank too much vinegar just now, it's so sour." "Who are you calling jealous?" The two women put down their chopsticks and looked at him at the same time. Lee turned his head to look at the frowning second young Miss Lu and then at the slightly focused eldest princess. He silently stood up and, without saying a word, picked up his bowl of white rice and walked into the kitchen. "Rice soaked in water doesn't taste good. I miss Rui, I miss Xiao Huan." In the Duke Qin residence there were many people in the hall, including Minister of Ceremonies Qin Chong. They were not officials of the court, but key figures of some rich and powerful families. One of them sneered, "I'd like to see how this academy can survive without books and paper. If it's just books, the royal family should have many engravings. If Princess Royal can convince His Majesty to hand over the royal family's collection, it won't be a problem. But the paper mill, brother, you have to keep an eye on your family's paper mills. Don't worry about this, the Yu family will not sell a single piece of paper to the academy. They want to destroy the foundation of our families, and our Yu family knows the severity of this. It's good that brother Yu understands. If we can't stop those academies, I'm afraid that in a few decades, our families will only exist in name." Everyone present knew very well what their families relied on to survive for hundreds of years. If the academy was allowed to continue to develop, all the scholars in the world would be drawn to the academy, and their foundation would be destroyed. Outside the door, a delicate figure walked into the corridor. Immediately, a servant jogged forward and said respectfully, "Miss, second master is inside discussing some matters, I'll go and report immediately." The white-haired girl waved her hand and said, "No need, I'm just going out for a walk. When second brother is done, just let him know." With that, she and a servant girl walked in the direction of the residence's gate. On a street somewhere in the capital, a young woman walked in front, and a young girl followed closely behind. Zheng Zumo turned around and glared at Xiao Chui, saying, "You little girl, you're getting bolder and bolder recently. Next time you talk nonsense, be careful of your butt." The young girl pouted and said with some grievance, "Miss, Xiao Chui is doing this for your own good. You've done so many things for him, you have to let him know, or else it would be for nothing." Zheng Zumo glanced at her and said, "What for him? This is me. I'm doing it for myself, for my future child." Xiao Chui looked at her and said weakly, "Your child is still his child, there's no difference, Xiao Chui." The young girl looked at her and said with some bitterness, "Miss, you're still hiding it from me. I saw it that day you two were hugging and rolling on the bed." Zheng Zumo blushed and glared at her, saying, "We're almost at the shop, don't talk nonsense. I'll deal with you when we get back." "Hello, Miss Zheng." The two walked into a cloth shop, and several women immediately came forward and bowed respectfully. "It's okay, I'm just looking around. You guys go ahead." Zheng Zumo walked to the door of the inner room, then turned back and said, "By the way, bring in the things I left here yesterday." A young girl responded and took out a small bag from the counter. However, the expression on her face was a bit funny, and she forced herself not to laugh out loud. She took the bag in. However, she was secretly amused. Miss Zheng was beautiful and her painting was also good, but this needlework was really not pleasing to the eye. When she came out of the inner room and saw a guest coming in, she was startled at first, then immediately came back to her senses. She hurriedly went up and asked, "Madam, what would you like to see?" Chapter 790. The woman who walked into the shop looked to be in her 30s. She had a beautiful appearance but a head of extremely eye-catching white hair. This was also the reason why the girl was momentarily stunned. The white-haired woman's voice was soft as she asked, "I ordered a bolt of Suyun brocade here yesterday. Have they arrived yet?" "I've already sent someone to hurry them. They'll be here soon." The girl smiled apologetically and said, "Madam, why don't you take a seat in the inner room and have some tea and pastries? I'll inform you as soon as the goods arrive. The standard of this cloth shop was extremely high even in the capital where there were many shops. Because of the high price of the cloth, they usually entertained some important guests. Thus, a room was specially opened in the back for the guests to rest and entertain themselves while waiting. When the servant girl behind the white-haired woman helped her into the inner room, she said with a smile, "If second master knows that Miss has prepared a gift for him, he will definitely be very happy." The white-haired woman shook her head and said, "It's just a pair of knee pads. After the beginning of autumn, the weather has gradually become cold. Second brother has an old injury on his leg. I only hope this can lessen his pain." As the two spoke, they slowly walked into the inner room. Hiss. Zheng Zumo put down the thing in her hand and looked at the dark red spot on her fingertip. She frowned slightly and gently sucked on her finger. She was already used to this small sting, but she was not satisfied with the thing in her hand. They were both women, but Sister Ruoqing could make such exquisite little clothes. How come it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens when it came to her? A baby's little clothes had been sewn into a mess by her. Even if it wasn't for the present, she had to think about the future. Her own child had to wear a few pieces of clothes she had sewn herself. After thinking about this, her pretty face became a bit red. "Miss, are you making little clothes for the child?" A somewhat surprised voice came from behind. Zheng Zumo turned around and was startled when she saw the white-haired woman. Then her face became even redder. She hurriedly put away the things in her hand and said in a panic, "No, I'm just sewing it for fun." The white-haired woman sat down next to her with a smile and said, "There's nothing to be embarrassed about. Everything is difficult at the beginning. When I first started, I wasn't as good as you." "Really?" Zheng Zumo looked up at her in surprise. The white-haired woman nodded and looked at her, asking, "Miss, did you do it for your child?" I don't have a child yet." Zheng Zumo shook her head with a blush. The white-haired woman looked at her carefully. Her eyebrows were not open yet, so she should still be a virgin. It was indeed a little too early to prepare these things. However, wasn't she the same? 20 years ago she had the exact same thought as her. Now, there were more than 10 sets of such clothes at home, but no one had ever worn them. Her gaze fell on the hands of the girl opposite her. Looking at the clothes that were so badly made, she seemed to be reminded of something. After staring blankly for a moment, she shook her head and pointed at a certain spot on the clothes. She smiled and said, "Look, this place shouldn't be sewn like this." Hearing her mention clothes, Zheng Zumo hurriedly looked up. The white-haired woman smiled and said, "And here you can't use this kind of needlework here. I will teach you a needlework technique." It was taught by the best nanny in the mansion. Zheng Zumo had a very high level of painting and she had designed so many clothing styles. Naturally, her imagination was very strong. The white-haired woman only needed to give her a little poke, and she could immediately figure out the mystery. She took apart the place that had been sewn and did it according to what the white-haired woman had taught her. It was indeed much better than before. "Thank you so much." At this moment she finally found the right direction and felt a sense of accomplishment. She held the white-haired woman's hand and said excitedly. The white-haired woman smiled and asked, "Miss and your lover should be getting married soon, right?" Zheng Zumo was startled. She lowered her head and said with a blush, I don't know when." The white-haired woman patted her hand and said, "Needlework is not difficult. As long as you put your heart into it, you can quickly learn it. It's urgent." This matter couldn't be explained. Zheng Zumo just blushed and lowered her head in silence. At this time, the girl from before walked in and said, "Madam, the Suyun brocade you wanted has arrived." The white-haired woman stood up and nodded. She thought for a moment and asked, "Do you have soft smoke and cicada gauze here?" Soft smoke and cicada gauze were the materials that had been the talk of the capital recently. Everyone talked about them as if they were gods. There were even a few stories about these two materials that no one knew if were true or false. Although they hadn't been sold yet, the price had already reached an outrageous level. The girl shook her head and said, "These two materials haven't been officially sold yet. You won't be able to buy them in any cloth store in the capital." The white-haired woman nodded and said, "Then forget it. Young miss, I heard that the soft smoke net is extremely thin. If you use it as a mosquito net, it will look like smoke from a distance. Is it true?" As she walked out of the shop, a young maid carrying a piece of cloth behind her muttered, "I only heard about it from the second madam. I wanted to buy it for her, but since it hasn't been sold yet, we'll talk about it later." The white-haired woman shook her head and said, "Let's go back." Wait a moment. Footsteps came from behind her. The white-haired woman turned around and saw the girl from before quickly walking out. Zheng Zumo looked at her and said with a smile, "If you want the soft smoke and cicada gauze, I just happen to have some extra. If you don't mind." The white-haired woman paused for a moment before nodding slightly. "Okay. Miss, this soft smoke is so thin. It would look great if it was made into a mosquito net. That girl is so generous, giving us 4 bolts at once. I heard there are only 4 colors, now we have all of them. This cicada gauze is also not bad and it looks good. These 2 materials can't be bought in the entire capital. I wonder where Miss Zheng got them." On the street, 2 young servant girls carried several bolts of cloth in their arms and whispered to each other as they walked. Behind them, a man with a square face turned his head and said in a low voice, "Go and find out where that girl from earlier came from." The white-haired woman looked back at them and said, "No need. If we meet anyone on the street, we will also investigate their background. How many people does second brother need to arrange around me?" The man had a troubled expression and said, "Third miss, but the second master. If second brother asks, I will give him an explanation." The white-haired woman looked at him and said, "However, second brother is usually busy with work. Don't bother him with these small things." "Yes." The man could only nod helplessly. The white-haired woman turned around and revealed a slight smile. Looking at the girl, she felt like she was looking at herself from many years ago. This was why she taught her those things in the cloth shop. Later, the girl sent someone back to fetch the cloth, and the 2 of them sat in the shop for a while and chatted. Of course, most of the time, it was the girl who asked her about needlework. She also answered them one by one, including the girl's request to set up a time to continue asking her for advice. She also agreed without hesitation. She could understand the girl's thoughts. She made clothes for her own child. Even if her finger was pricked by needles and was riddled with scars, no matter how much she suffered, her heart would still be sweet. Just like her from 20 years ago. Chapter 791. Ever since he lost to Her Royal Highness the last time, Li Yi had never received a smile from Mississippi Lu. Of course, the behavior of taking the initiative to pick up food for him during meals had never appeared again. For this matter, Li Yi felt very wronged. That day, she clearly did not perform well, which was why she lost to Princess Royal by half a move. Every injustice had its perpetrator, and every debt had its debtor. These days, Princess Royal's good friend came to visit, but she did not take the opportunity to find Princess Royal to regain her face. Instead, she vented her anger on him. To think that he thought she was reasonable last time. He had really misjudged her. Moreover, she only lost by half a move, but Princess Royal lost her entire life. It was clear at a glance which was more important and which was more important. Li Yi sighed. They were all family. She was unreasonable, but he could not argue with her. She clearly did not do anything wrong, but she still had to think about how to ease the situation. Fang walked in with a box in his hand and asked, "Young master, this broken thing is not worth much money. Why do you still want to make it?" The broken thing he was talking about was the glass that had gone from a value of 10,000 gold to worthless in a short period of time. It should be called glass now. Ever since Lioli lowered the price, the secret glass workshop had not been shut down. To old Fang, it was a complete waste of manpower and resources. He opened the box and took out something from inside. He weighed it in his hand and waved it in front of old Fang's eyes. He shook his head and said, "What's the use of this lousy thing other than being able to see people more clearly?" Sometimes old Fang was like a wise man, but sometimes he just couldn't wrap his head around it. This small mirror was something that he had spent a lot of effort to create with great difficulty. In terms of effect, of course, it could not be compared to the electroplated mirrors of the future, but it was only a little darker and the clarity was not bad. At least, it was hundreds of times better than the bronze mirrors of this world. Glass could not only be sold as a luxury. Now that the mirror had been made, the next step, Li Yi planned to get someone to grind it and see if they could make a set of binoculars. This thing was very useful in many places. For example, it could be used to observe the situation of the enemy in the army, to enjoy the scenery when traveling, or to steal. Of course, none of this was important. The most important thing right now was how to use this mirror to mend the cracks in his relationship with Mississippi Lu, to bury the hatchet, to reconcile, to rekindle old dreams. A mirror was indispensable in a woman's room, especially for a woman who loved beauty. If a glass mirror was placed in this era, it would definitely be a treasure pursued by countless women. Li Yi glanced at Fang and was too lazy to explain to him. Mississippi Lu had just finished practicing her sword and was now wiping her precious autumn water. Li Yi walked over and stood in front of her. Mississippi Lu continued to wipe her sword without lifting her head. Li Yi handed over the already embedded mirror and said, "Don't wipe it yet. I'll give you something. One who is unaccountably solicitous is hiding evil intentions." Mississippi Lu finally spoke, but she still did not raise her head. Li Yi moved the mirror closer again to make it easier for her to see herself in the mirror. Second young mistress Lu finally stopped moving. She stared at the woman in the mirror, whose features were extremely clear. She was completely stunned. She was used to seeing a blurry bronze mirror. It was impossible for her not to be shocked when she suddenly saw her other self in the clear glass mirror. "What's wrong? Have you never seen such a beautiful woman before? One who is unaccountably solicitous is hiding evil intentions." Li Yi looked at her proudly. "This is the one and only Lioli glass mirror in the world. Just take it as me being solicitous. If you don't want it, I'll give it to someone else." In a flash, the mirror in his hand disappeared. He did not even have time to react. This made Li Yi understand more about the gap between him and Mississippi Lu. "Thanks." She really liked the mirror in her hand. The bronze mirror in the room could be thrown away in a moment. Mississippi Lu raised her head and glanced at it. With this sentence, it meant that she had been bought over by him. This mirror was worth it. Fang looked at this scene from afar with an extremely surprised expression on his face. He had seen the second miss arguing with the son-in-law because of jealousy these days. Just because of that broken thing, the second miss compromised first? Although there were many things he did not understand, he was not stupid. If the second miss liked it so much, it meant that it was not that broken. It was very likely to be a valuable treasure. He quickly walked over and looked at Li Yi. He smiled and said, "Son-in-law, the workshop has made more than 10 pieces of this thing." He counted with his fingers and said, "You can give away 10 pieces at most. Can you leave 2 for me?" Li Yi looked at him in a daze. He then looked back at Mississippi Lu and found that Mississippi Lu was also looking at him at the same time. Mississippi Lu crossed her arms, her eyes shining. "One of a kind?" Li Yi's face darkened. He grabbed Fang's arm and walked out. Go, go, go. Why are you keeping it? You need to change this habit of yours. If Mrs. Fang finds out, I'll see how you deal with it." He couldn't favor one and discriminate against the other. If he gave Miss Lu a mirror, it meant that he had to give many more. The one in Rui's room was naturally the brightest and largest. Xiao Huan, Shaning, and Yong Ning's room were all in cartoon shapes. Princess Royal got 1, Willow Lane got 2, Fang got 2, and his family got at least 2 more. The last one was taken by Li Xian. He needed more time to make it again. What do you think is the principle of this glass mirror? Why can it reflect people's figures so clearly? Why is the handwriting in the mirror reversed? Li Yi was fishing in the lake of the School of Mathematics. Since he found that the fish here were fat and easy to catch, he did not plan to buy from the market. It was best to catch fish by himself. However, since Li Xian came over and started talking to himself, he had not caught a single fish. He had caught 2 just now. It was enough for today. Li Yi put away his rod and looked at the Princess Royal in the pavilion behind him. He asked, "Last time the School of Mathematics lacked books and paper. Have you solved the problem?" Although it was not class time, the 3 deans were here. Even the students of the School of Mathematics avoided them. Before the eldest princess could say anything, Li Xian said, "Of course not. How else can we solve this? Normal books are easy to deal with. Although most of the engravings are controlled by the powerful families, the ones we can find should be enough. However, the books you specified don't have engravings. How to print them is a big problem. If we were to engrave them one by one, it would cost a lot. I'm afraid that most of the money we have would have to be invested in this area," he said angrily, "and paper. Once the schools of mathematics start to operate, there will be a huge demand for paper. Although the higher the demand, the lower the price. However, almost 90% of the paper shops are in the hands of the rich families." In order to discuss this, Mingzu visited the Yu family 3 times. She didn't even get to see the head of the Yu family. "You still have the cheek to say that?" Li Yi threw down the fishing rod and looked at him. He asked, "If there is no engraving, why don't you think of a way? Paper is expensive, and the rich families don't cooperate. Why don't you reduce the cost and make your own? If you have to rely on Mingzu to think of a way, what use is the Academy of Sciences? What use are you?" Chapter 792. Solve the problem of engraving? Li Xian looked as if he had heard a fairy tale and stared straight at Li Yi. "It's easy for you to say. Do you think it's like the existing collections of history? There are countless engravings and the teaching materials you mentioned have not been compiled yet. Where can I find so many craftsmen to engrave them one by one? Even if I can really engrave them, I don't know how long it will take. As for improving the paper making and lowering the cost, if it could be lowered, it would have been done long ago. There are many kinds of paper on the market, but only a few are suitable for writing. The aristocratic families like the Yu family, which have been around for hundreds of years, all have their own unique paper-making formula, which is the most widely circulated in the market. If they don't cooperate, this matter can't be improved. Li Xian's spittle flew as he spoke, and his tone was rather indignant. No one has solved these two problems for thousands of years. How can we solve them so easily? Li Yi glanced at him and said, "Oh, do you want to bet?" Li Xian looked at him and asked, "What do you want to bet on?" "Let's bet on whether I can make cheap and high-quality paper, and whether I can think of a way to print books in large quantities in a short period of time." Haha, these two things are related to all the scholars in the world. Don't try to trick me. If you have such a method, you would have taken it out when you were building the academy. Why would you wait until now? Li Xian sneered and asked, "Tell me, what are the stakes?" "I haven't thought of the stakes yet. We'll talk about it later, but I'm sure it won't be too much." "Why, are you afraid?" "Afraid?" Li Xian sneered. "Why don't you go out and ask around? I'm the crown prince, what have I been afraid of? Then do you want to bet or not?" No. Although he was not afraid, if he still insisted on betting with him knowing that he would lose, then it wasn't a question of whether he was afraid or not, but whether he was stupid or not. Based on past experience, whenever he made a bet with her, he must be very confident about something. Today his tone was so certain that it couldn't be any more successful. Only a fool would make such a bet. Li Xian had a fierce expression on his face as he said, "You have to teach the Yu family a lesson and help Emingzi vent her anger." Li Yi picked up the two fish and walked back. As he walked, he muttered to himself, "How should I eat the fish today? Thank you so much for the past 2 days." In the small pavilion of the cloth shop, Zheng Zimo stood up and bowed to the white-haired woman. The white-haired woman smiled and said, "It's okay. I have nothing to do anyway. I haven't touched these things for many years, so I'm a bit rusty. I probably won't have the chance to do it in the future. I'm afraid I'll forget about it if time passes." Zheng Zimo shook her head and said, "How can there be no chance to do it? I don't know if your child is married yet. In the future your child will also have children. They will be very happy wearing the clothes you made." "My child?" The white-haired woman's eyes were a bit dazed. Then she smiled and said, "That's true. While I can still do it, I should make more. After a few years, I won't be able to do it." She turned to look at the girl with a smile and said, "I like the fabrics in this shop very much. If there are any new styles in the future, please keep an eye out for me." Zheng Zimo nodded with a smile. "Recently, all the famous fabrics in the capital are available here. As long as you have heard of them, just send someone to get them." Due to some marketing reasons, many of the best fabrics needed to be preheated in advance. After a period of discussion in the capital, they would be pushed out. Before this, it was almost impossible for others to get the fabrics. However, these cloth shops and the clothing shops in the capital were all under her control. Naturally, there was no problem of not getting the goods. Qin Miaoyu suddenly looked at Zheng Zimo and asked, "Miss Zheng is about to get married, right?" Zheng Zimo heard this and blushed a little. She whispered, "No, not at all." Qin Miaoyu looked at her with a smile on her face. She held her hand and said, "Although we are women, since we have met someone we like, we still have to fight for him. How can a moment of reserve compare to a lifetime of happiness?" Hearing this, her face became even redder. She had seen, kissed, hugged, and even said such shameful words. How could she still have any reserve? In short, don't regret what you do now. Qin Miaoyu patted her hand and said, "I should go too. I will see you off." Although they hadn't met many times, the two of them were very congenial. When they walked out of the inner room hand in hand, they heard a slightly messy sound coming from the shop. Inside the shop, a young girl said apologetically, "My apologies, sir, the soft smoke gauze and cicada yarn haven't arrived yet. Please wait for a few days. As soon as they arrive, we will immediately send someone to inform you." Inside the shop, the young man hugged an enchanting woman and whispered with his head lowered, "You see, they don't have the goods here." "There's nothing we can do," the enchanting woman said coquettishly. "It's not that they don't have the goods. These two kinds of fabrics are only produced in their shop. Young Master Yu doesn't know, but she can tell you that they don't have them here. Those slutty foxes in the Jade Courtyard all use them." The young man showed a hesitant expression. He didn't know the details of this cloth shop, but he knew that it was impossible to do business in the capital without some kind of background. The Yu family was also a big aristocratic family in the Jing kingdom. Although it was not as big as the Cui family and the Wang family, it was not far behind. Because of the relationship between the king of Shu, the Yu family and the Cui family were especially close. Unlike the Cui family, which mainly dealt in jewelry, the Yu family had been running a paper mill for decades. The Yu family's paper name was known throughout the Jing kingdom. In the eyes of most people, they were a top scholarly family. However, this was not the capital he was proud of. At least for now, the Yu family did not have the capital to let him run amok at the bottom of a well. Just as young Master Yu was hesitating, the enchanting woman beside him leaned over and whispered something in his ear. I heard that the soft smoke gauze and cicada yarn are extremely thin, and the color is also beautiful. If I wear them, I will definitely look good with half of them covered. When the time comes, I will wear them for you to see. Although young Master Yu didn't know what soft smoke gauze and cicada yarn were, he understood the woman's words. Suddenly, a blurry image appeared in his mind. Although the Yu family was not strong enough to run amok in the capital, that was in the past. Now, even the eldest princess who presided over the court had a favor to ask of the Yu family, but she did not get to see her father. Recently, the Cui family was extremely satisfied with the Yu family. In the future, when the king of Shu ascended to the throne, the Yu family might be able to climb even higher. Even if there was someone behind the shop, they would not dare to provoke the Yu family now. Once again thinking of the eye-catching image that appeared in his mind, young Master Yu reached into his robe and adjusted his posture. Then he looked at the woman and said angrily, "How dare you lie to me? You didn't receive the goods? Then tell me, where did the cloth on the outside come from?" Chapter 793. In the shop, the young girl had an awkward expression. Young master, you shut up." Young Master Yu impatiently waved his hand and interrupted her. "Where is your shop manager? Let him personally tell me if you have any goods or not." As soon as he finished speaking, several men who looked like guards immediately walked up and stood behind him. They were full of vigor. A slightly older woman turned around to look at the door of the inner room. Seeing the woman at the door nod slightly, she immediately walked up and said, "Young master, I'm really sorry. We don't have soft smoke silk and cicada wing yarn at the moment. I don't know where young master's residence is. Once we have the goods tomorrow, we will immediately send someone to deliver them to your residence." Seeing the attitude of the shop manager immediately soften, young Master Yu's heart calmed down a bit. It seemed that the power behind this shop wasn't that great. However, since the other party had expressed goodwill, he didn't need to be overbearing and make an enemy for no reason. "Ningyuan Ho's residence," he lightly said. He lowered his head to look at the enchanting woman and whispered, "You see, they said that they will deliver it tomorrow. Why don't we wait a bit longer?" "I will listen to young master." The woman nodded. She then glanced around the shop and her eyes suddenly lit up. She pointed at a young maidservant in front of her who was holding a roll of cloth and said, "That Kunyu courtyard has a relationship with them, so they can always get the latest styles earlier. I won't ask for anything else, but young master, I also want a roll of cloth like that." Young Master Yu tilted his head and glanced at this woman. He had spent a lot of effort to win over this woman. She was a famous prostitute in the capital. It was said that she hadn't been combed. Although he only wanted to play with her, he still wanted to spend a night with her so that he wouldn't waste the effort of the past few days. He only wanted to quickly get tonight. Before that, he would naturally do his best to satisfy the other party's request. It was only a roll of cloth. He pointed at the maidservant and said to the cloth store manager, "Did you hear that? Bring 2 rolls of cloth like the one in her hands for this young master." The steward looked back with a troubled expression and said, "Young master, I'm really sorry. This type of woven cloud brocade will only be available for sale in 3 months. The soft smoke gauze and cicada wing muslin were going on sale today, so it was fine to give it to him 2 days in advance. However, this woven cloud brocade was a new material that wasn't going to be put on the market in the near future. She didn't have the right to decide. This time, there was no need for the enchanting woman to pout coquettishly. Young Master Yu's expression had already darkened. Just now, he had clearly told the other party that his home was Ningyuan Ho Mansion. But now, the other party was pointing at the cloth in the servant girl's hand and said that it would only be sold in 3 months. Was he teasing him? The weight of the 3 words, Marquis Ningyuan, was not so light. Moreover, the Yu residence of today was no longer the Yu residence of yesterday. It was about to soar to new heights. As the third young master of the Yu family, how could he be humiliated again and again? He took 2 steps forward and suddenly smiled. What did you say? Say it again. At this time, another woman walked out from behind and said faintly, I'm very sorry, this shop's cloth is still in the testing stage. This bolt is only a sample. If this young master is really interested, please come back in 3 months. When he saw the woman in front of him, a strange expression appeared on young Master Yu's face. He then pointed at the young servant girl holding the cloth and said, Oh, a sample. Since it's a sample, then give this young master 8 or 10 bolts. Otherwise, this young master would like to ask, why can your cloth be given to the prostitutes in the brothel, but not this young master? Thinking of the woman's words, young Master Yu's gaze swept across the room. When he saw the white-haired woman, he curled his lips and said, the brothels these days really have all kinds of tricks. There are even white-haired girls. I don't know how those people could bear to do it. He didn't conceal his voice when he said this. Zheng Zumo was startled when she heard this, then anger appeared in her beautiful eyes. However, before she could speak, a clear voice reached her ears. Shut up. Inside the shop, a middle-aged man's expression had been calm until young Master Yu said this. His face instantly turned ashen. He took 2 steps forward and slapped him hard in the face. Young Master Yu seemed to be stunned by this sudden slap. He staggered and almost fell to the ground. After stabilizing himself for a long time, he felt the burning pain on his face. Only then did he understand what had just happened. What are you still standing there for? He kicked the guard next to him and said angrily, break his hand for me. Third young miss, go in and rest for a while. Leave this to us. The middle-aged man turned around and said softly. He cracked the joints of his hands and when he turned back, his expression became fierce. He looked at the dozen or so figures coming in from outside and ordered, be careful not to break anything in the shop. At this time, seeing the crowd surrounding them, young Master Yu, who realized what had happened, began to pale. You, what do you want? My father is Ning Yuan Ho, and I am a member of the Yu family. You, if you dare to make a move. Zheng Zumo was pulled by the white-haired woman into the inner room in a daze. Only a moment later, the middle-aged man came in and said respectfully, it's all taken care of. Third young miss, let's go. Qin Miaoyu turned her head and smiled at Zheng Zumo. I'll go first. Zheng Zumo nodded absent-mindedly. Only now did she understand that the identity of this Madame Chen, who was skilled in needlework, did not seem to be as simple as she had imagined. At this moment, young Master Yu was no longer in the shop. He and his guards had been grabbed by the arms and thrown out of the shop. Only the enchanting woman was left. Her face was pale and when she came to her senses, she screamed and ran out in a panic. In a brothel somewhere in the capital, several women looked at the enchanting woman who walked in and said with a smile, Oh, why are you back so early today? Why didn't that young Master Yu pester you a little longer? Sigh, why am I not as lucky as my sister? The Yu family is truly noble. If I can be taken back by young Master Yu as a concubine, I won't have to worry about wealth for the rest of my life. The enchanting woman laughed and teased them for a while. Then she went upstairs by herself. She walked into her room and closed the door. How is it? The enchanting woman turned around with a solemn expression. Looking at the other side of the curtain, she said, It's very different from the plan. There wasn't much conflict with the other party. She quietly recounted what happened today. After a long time, a voice came from the other side. It's fine, these are enough. The one who suffered today was young Master Yu. As long as the Yu family doesn't pursue the matter, isn't my lord's plan, the Yu family? The voice of the man behind the curtain was still very calm. Whether to pursue the matter or not is not up to the Yu family. Qin Chong only has one sister. For her, he would turn against his own family. That person will not let the Yu family off easily. However, one Yu family is not enough. My lord? Leave the capital before tomorrow and never come back. Chapter 794. The capital magistrate, Lu Daiyou, had been very busy recently. Every day he worked day and night. He was often busy until late at night. He could fall asleep with his head on the pillow, causing his wife and concubines to complain a lot about him. He could only pretend that he did not see their resentful gazes. Several academies in the capital were still in the midst of preparations. After the corresponding preparations were completed, they would have to face the problem of recruiting students. Her Highness had handed this matter over to him, so he naturally had to do his best. Now that His Majesty had retired and Princess Royal was temporarily in charge of the court, Lu Dayo had more opportunities than most of the officials in the court. After all, as the former magistrate of Anxi County and what he had done after coming to the capital city, he had long been labeled as Princess Royal. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to get such a great credit for the preparation of the academy. Fortunately, since Princess Royal took over the government, the situation in the court had changed. Many people didn't know the situation for a while, so the capital city was much more peaceful. There were no more chores to bother him, so he could concentrate on the preparation of the academy. Your Excellency. Arrestor Zhao knocked on the door and walked in. He stood in the hall and cupped his hands respectfully to Wei Xiaobao. What's the matter? County Magistrate Lu glanced at him and asked, Is there another difficult case? It's not difficult. Detective Zhao shook his head and said, Today I saw people from Marquis Chen's mansion fighting with people from Marquis Ningyuan's mansion on the street. Marquis Chen's mansion and Marquis Ningyuan's mansion? County Magistrate Lu put down his pen and frowned. These two families have always been close and they are both King of Shu's people. What kind of fight did they have? Did they report it to the Yamen? Not really. Detective Zhao shook his head and said, People from Marquis Ningyuan's mansion seem to have suffered a loss and then went their separate ways. County Magistrate Lu glared at him and said, Why did you come to me if you didn't report it to the Yamen? Don't you think I have enough things to do here? I have spoken out of turn. Detective Zhao hurriedly bowed and turned to leave the hall. He whispered, Young master, you could have provoked anyone, but he provoked third Miss Qin. Who? Hearing that name, County Magistrate Lu trembled and asked, Who are you talking about? After a while, after listening to Detective Zhao's story, County Magistrate Lu breathed a sigh of relief and murmured, It's good that you didn't intervene in it. Just pretend that you didn't see it. Don't get involved in it. He knew better than anyone else how Royal Prince Duanyang's 2 ribs were broken. Furthermore, although he hadn't been in the capital for long, he had long heard of the rumors about the minister in charge. That was a lunatic who wouldn't even recognize his own family as long as his reverse scale was touched. The Yu family were in big trouble. Haidukshan Public House. Yu family. Qin Chong took a sip of tea and said, The eldest princess has visited 3 times, but Yu Dingfeng refused to see her, claiming to be sick. He has also announced that he won't sell a single piece of paper to the academy. The official workshops belong to the imperial court and can't all serve the academy. If this problem can't be solved, I'm afraid that the eldest princess's academy can only be built in the sky. Opposite him, Qin Qing nodded. The imperial consort is very satisfied with the Yu family this time. In addition, the Yu family has always been His Highness the King of Shu's wallet. This time, the Cui family has suffered heavy losses, so the Yu family's importance is even more prominent. In the future, the Yu family will have a high status in the imperial court. Perhaps at that time, even our Qin family will have to rely on them. Although they didn't want others to climb over their heads, the Yu family's importance now surpassed that of the Qin family. If they really succeeded in the future, the Yu family's contributions would not go unnoticed. The 2 brothers continued to comment on the current imperial court situation when a servant came in to report. Qin Qing looked down and asked lightly, What's the matter? The servant immediately said, Just now outside, a few guards of the Qin family had a conflict with 3rd Young Master Yu of Ningyuan Marquis' residence. 3rd Young Master Yu of Ningyuan Marquis' residence? Hearing this, Qin Qing frowned and asked, Was it Li Yan or Li Xing? What happened? Was anyone injured? It's not the 2 young masters. No one in our residence was injured, but 3rd Young Master Yu suffered a small loss. It's good that no one was injured. Qin Chong waved his hand and said, Young people are hot-blooded and can be forgiven. This is nothing. Send someone to prepare a generous gift and send it to the Yu residence. Then this matter will be considered settled. If it was anyone else, there would naturally be no need for generous gifts. However, the Yu family was different. The Yu family had a bright future ahead of them, so the Qin family still had to show some sincerity. He looked at the servant and asked, If it wasn't Li Yan or Li Xing, could it be Li Shen? We had just confined him a few days ago and just released him today and he's already causing trouble again? The servant knelt on the ground and said in a low voice, It wasn't young Master Li Shen either. It was 3rd Young Master Yu's guard. That 3rd Young Master Yu didn't know 3rd Young Master Yu's identity and said some vulgar words? Miao Yu? Qin Chong suddenly stood up from his chair and asked, What did the one surnamed Yu say? He said that third young master is a prostitute, crack. The teacup shattered and the tea splashed everywhere. Bastard, he's Yu Dingfeng's good son. An extremely gloomy voice sounded in the hall. Not long after, a wave of disorderly footsteps resounded within the Qin estate. The Qin clan's second master's face was livid, and a few dozen guards followed behind him as they hurriedly left the Qin estate. They headed west in a threatening manner, and all the people on the way moved aside in terror as they gazed towards a certain direction with lingering fear in their hearts, wondering exactly what had happened. Ningyuan Marquis's residence. Tears welled up in the eyes of the gorgeously dressed woman. She held third young master Yu's hand and sobbed, Who did this to him? My poor Yu, Qin family? How did you get into a conflict with the Qin family? How many times have I told you? The situation in the capital is unclear, so try not to cause trouble for me. Do you all have ears? A middle-aged man stood next to her and glanced at the bruised and swollen face of third young master Yu with a pained expression. He turned his head and asked the guards with a cold expression. One of the guards replied fearfully, Third young master didn't do anything and they attacked first. This time, it really wasn't young master's fault. As he spoke, he recounted the entire incident. Of course, he omitted the part where the young man had insulted the woman from the Qin family. Offending the Qin family just for a prostitute. Ningyuan Ho, Yu Dingfeng's face darkened as he said, When will you grow a little more careful? The Qin family has gone too far. You didn't do anything and they beat him to this state. The woman's eyes welled up with tears as she gritted her teeth and said, Master, you must get justice for you. The middle-aged man looked at third young master Yu and asked with a frown, You already told them where you came from. Why would the Qin family attack you for no reason? Third young master Yu's face was full of resentment as he said, How would I know? The Qin family are all crazy. That second young master of the Qin family is crazy, and so is that white-haired woman. I only said one thing to her. What did you say? Ningyuan Ho's expression changed and his heart skipped a beat. What white-haired woman? Third young master Yu acted as if he didn't see the panic on his father's face and said, I don't know. I only heard that person say something about third young Miss? Third young Miss Qin? Third young Miss Qin? Oh no. Ningyuan Ho's face was pale. He had just muttered a few words when someone ran in from outside in a panic. A servant of the Yu family panted heavily as he ran over and said with a terrified expression, Master, master, something bad has happened. The Qin family is here. Ningyuan Ho's expression changed drastically and he waved his hand without hesitation. Quickly hide the young master. The second young master of the Qin family had brought a group of people with him and aggressively attacked Ningyuan Ho's estate. Even in the capital, which never lacked for entertainment, it was still a big event. After hearing the news, the entire capital was in an uproar in an extremely short period of time. Countless people were paying attention to the development of this matter. Some people were watching from the estate while others hurriedly left and rushed in the direction of Ningyuan Ho's estate. Inside the yamen, County Magistrate Lu reminded Constable Chen again, Remember, you didn't see anything just now and you don't know anything. At the Ministry of Revenue yamen, Assistant Minister Zheng hurriedly took his leave and immediately left in a sedan chair. At the Chui family estate, a carriage drove out from the side door and quickly headed in a certain direction. Qin estate. Qin Yen, who had just heard the news, quickly walked out of the estate. Just as he was about to step onto the carriage, a voice came from behind him. Big brother, where are you going? Qin Yen already had one foot on the carriage. He turned his head to look and frowned. Where did you go again? You didn't even eat lunch at home. Lord Father just asked. Qin Fifth Master smiled and said, There was a new show at the brothel today. I was so engrossed in it that I forgot the time. If you like to listen to shows, just buy a few actors at home. It's best not to go to that kind of place. Qin Yen said this and then boarded the carriage. He let down the curtain and urged, Quick, to Ningyuan Ho's estate. Qin Fifth Master shook his head. When he stepped into the Qin estate with his hands behind his back, he muttered in a low voice. How can the shows at home be better than those outside? Chapter 795. The second master of the Qin family, Qin Chong, had led dozens of guards from the house of high dukes. They passed through the streets and alleys, aggressively attacking Ningyuan Ho's residence. This incident had caused quite a stir in the capital for the past 2 days. The Ho's residence had been attacked. On a large scale, this was a crime punishable by death. But on a smaller scale it could be so small that the authorities did not even need to show up. The attackers were from the House of High Dukes, led by Qin Chong. When the incident happened, the capital was in an uproar. However, this incident did not cause any serious consequences. Although the main gate of Ning Yuanho's residence had been torn down, the Yu family did not say anything. The authorities would not come looking for trouble. The commotion yesterday was not small. Not only the Qin and Yu families but the Zheng, Cui and Qin families as well as many officials from the King of Shu's faction, all went to Yu's residence. Although it was not known how the incident was resolved, it was not a big deal. Li Yi knew about this yesterday but he was only a little surprised. Internal strife was the custom of the King of Shu's faction, so he was not surprised. At this moment he was listening to Xiao Cui complain that someone had caused trouble at the cloth shop yesterday. Although they were chased out, they said some nasty things that even she could not bear to listen to. That madam was very kind and taught the young miss many things. Now the clothes that the young miss sewed were not as ugly as they used to be. Who was causing trouble yesterday? Li Yi looked at her and asked. Xiao Cui thought for a moment and said, it was something like young master Yu. I think it was Ning Yuanho or something. I can't remember. Li Yi was startled. Ning Yuanho. Why did these three words sound so familiar? It seemed that the Yu family head that the eldest princess could not meet was Ning Yuanho. This morning the internal strife incident was still spreading in the capital, and Ning Yuanho was also the male lead. The Yu family, what a coincidence. If the Yu family bullied others like this, the heavens would naturally accept it. He shook his head and then asked Xiao Cui, earlier, you said that the madam who has been very close to your young miss recently, what's going on? This. Xiao Cui blinked and said, I met her at the cloth shop last time. That madam is very good at needlework. She taught young miss how to make children's clothes. Do you know which family's madam is it? Although the two women were surrounded by people to protect them, Li did not want to give them the feeling that they were being monitored all the time. In addition to ensuring their safety, he would not interfere with other things. Even so, the sudden appearance of a madam by her side still had to be investigated. I don't know. We only know that her surname is Qin. That madam has never mentioned it, so we can't ask her directly. However, she usually brings a lot of guards with her when she goes out. Xiao Cui blinked her eyes twice, then she patted her head and said, that's right, that madam's age isn't that old, but her hair is all white. That servant girl called her third lady, third miss, surnamed Qin, and her hair is all white? Li Yi was stunned. It can't be such a coincidence, right? On the street, Zheng Zumo and the white-haired woman walked side by side. The latter turned her head to look at her and asked, the Yu family didn't make things difficult for you afterward, did they? Zheng Zumo shook her head. No, this is the capital. They wouldn't dare to do anything. The Yu family is powerful after all. It's better to be careful. She reminded, if the Yu family makes things difficult for you in the future, come find me at Duke Chen's residence. Although the two had seen each other several times these days, due to their own reasons, they usually referred to each other as Madame Chen and Miss Zheng. They had never voluntarily revealed their identities. Zheng Zumo had already guessed that her identity was not ordinary from yesterday's incident, but she still did not expect it to be to this extent. Even the current Zheng family could not compare to a behemoth like the Qin family. Soon, she threw these thoughts to the back of her mind and nodded politely. She glanced around and suddenly realized that they were almost at Willow Lane. She pointed forward and said, my house is just ahead. Madam, do you want to come in and sit for a bit? Hearing this, the white-haired woman hesitated for a moment, then nodded lightly. Miss, are you not from the capital? As the two walked forward, the white-haired woman suddenly asked. This area belonged to the downtown area. There were no big mansions and officials and rich families would not choose to build their houses here. This Miss Zheng had an extraordinary temperament, and she had such a shop in the capital. She had thought that she was also the daughter of such a family, but now it seemed that this was not the case. I stayed in the capital for a few years when I was a child. Later I went to another place and came back last year. Zheng Zumo briefly mentioned this matter. She did not want to mention some memories about the capital, including her own name. After all, more than 10 years ago the Zheng family was also prominent. However, in that Zheng family all the men of the direct line died, and the women became the musical house. Everything here, for her, was an extremely horrible memory. The white-haired woman did not ask further. The two walked to the entrance of an alley. Zheng Zumo smiled and pointed inside saying, it's in there. Above the entrance of the alley there was a stone plaque, on which the words Willow Alley were written. The white-haired woman just glanced at it and walked in side by side with Zheng Zumo. After a few steps, she suddenly stopped and murmured, "Willow Alley?" As if thinking of something, she looked back at Zheng Zumo with an expression of disbelief and expectation. "Miss Zheng. Is it Miss Zheng Zumo from Willow Alley?" Hearing her name from the mouth of a person she had never revealed made her completely ignore the fact that the Willow Alley in front of her was not the eldest daughter of the Zheng family. Her body trembled and her face turned pale. However, after Mrs. Chen said this, the expression on her face was different from any of what she had imagined. Surprise, and even a little bit of love? Seeing her reaction, Chen Miaoyu knew that her guess was right. Holding her hand, a smile appeared on her face and she said, "It turns out to be you. I should have asked earlier. Zheng Zumo was confused by her reaction and asked in confusion, "Mrs. Chen, you know me?" Chen Miaoyu held her hand and said with a smile, "Let's go in and talk." Zheng Zumo was pulled by her and walked into the alley in a daze. "Okay, I'll go first. When your young miss or Miss Ruoqing comes back, just let them know." In the small courtyard, Li Yi stood up and patted Xiao Chui's head, saying, "Next time I come, I'll bring 2 glass mirrors for you and Xiao Zhu." "Really?" Xiao Chui's eyes were shining. She had envied the mirror in her young miss room that could clearly reflect a person's figure for a long time. "Yes, you must keep your promise." Li Yi walked to the door of the courtyard, then turned back and waved. "Let's go." He raised his hand to open the door, but the door was pushed open from the outside. "I didn't expect you to know before." Zheng Zumo turned her head and walked in while talking to Mrs. Chen. When she stepped over the threshold, her chest was suddenly pressed by something. She looked back, saw Li Yi standing at the door and lowered her head again. Looking at Miss Zheng and Miss Chen standing at the door, Li Yi's mouth slightly opened. He could swear on his conscience that just now, he really just wanted to open the door. "You're back, what a coincidence." His expression didn't change. He helped her tidy up her clothes and said with a smile. Chapter 796. How old are you? Your clothes are wrinkled and you don't even know how to tidy them up. If it wasn't for Xiao Chui, you wouldn't even be able to take care of yourself. Li Yi helped her tidy up her clothes and looked at her with a frown. Then he turned to the white-haired woman and smiled. "You're here too. Come on in." Zheng Zumo looked at him and then at Mrs. Chen next to her. Confusion appeared on her face again. After walking back and sitting down in the guest hall, Li Yi looked at Miss Chen and said, "I heard about what happened in the cloth shop yesterday. Thank you very much." Zheng Zumo whispered, "It's me who should be thanking someone. What does it have to do with you? It's the same. Third Miss Chen looked at Li Yi in her face and said with a smile, "Ah." Zheng Zumo was confused. She found that ever since Mrs. Chen knew her name, her attitude toward her had changed significantly. She was a little confused. At this moment she still had a lot of questions in her mind, but she could only suppress these thoughts for now. Miss Chen looked at Zheng Zumo with a loving expression. Then she turned to look at Li Yi and asked, "Rui should be giving birth soon. How is her health recently?" Li Yi nodded and said, "There are still 3 months left. She is a martial artist and has always been in good health." Zheng Zumo was surprised. She knew Li Yi very well. He was very casual when talking to anyone. Even with elders he was not afraid to make some harmless jokes. This was the first time she had seen him so well behaved. He even used honorifics to address others. This attitude was unprecedented, so she couldn't help but be more confused. "Zumo, there isn't much to do at the brothel. Let's eat dumplings today." Wan Ruoqing walked in from outside. Seeing the situation in the hall, she was slightly startled and asked, "There are guests." "This is Mrs. Chen." Zheng Zumo stood up and introduced her. Then she asked, "If you don't have anything else to do, why don't you eat here before leaving?" Miss Chen was startled for a moment, then a smile appeared on her face and she said, "Okay." She stood up and walked over. She naturally held Ruoqing's hand and asked with a smile, "You must be Miss Ruoqing. You are indeed a rare beauty." Wan Ruoqing felt a little guilty under her gaze. She didn't know why this Mrs. Chen, whom she met for the first time, was so enthusiastic. She secretly glanced at Zheng Zumo with a slightly confused expression. Zheng Zumo was also confused. She had never mentioned Sister Ruoqing to her. Why did she call out her name at first sight? At this moment she was even more confused. She just wanted to ask Li Yi about it after Mrs. Chen left. Third Miss Chen seemed to realize that she had lost her composure. She let go of her hand and said, "Sorry for disturbing you today, Not at all, not at all. One watching said hurriedly. Then she said, I didn't expect to have guests today. I will go out and buy more stuffing. Miss Ruaching, you don't have to do that. Third Miss Chen looked back and said, Xiao, go out and buy some more. The servant girl called Xiao, had a troubled expression. She walked to her side and whispered, But miss, today is your birthday. Second master is at home, go. Yes, miss. The servant girl bit her lip and finally nodded. She walked out. Wan Ruaching turned around and ordered, Yuzhu Xiaocui, go bring the stuffing and the dough I rolled this morning to the courtyard. We will go over there to make dumplings. Time to make dumplings? Just watch. Can the dumplings you make be eaten? It's as if the dumplings you make are edible. We still have to rely on Sister Ruaching? The two servant girls chattered and ran away quickly. Wan Ruaching and third Miss Chin chatted and laughed as they walked out. Zheng Zumo and Li Yi were a few steps behind. Zheng Zumo tilted her head and asked, Have you and Madame Chin known each other for a long time? Li Yi shook his head and said, It's a long story. I will tell you later. Zheng Zumo nodded and glared at Li Yi. She asked, Didn't you say that you are a martial arts master and that nothing within a radius of 300 feet can escape your ears? Bragging was just bragging. He was only slightly better than ordinary people. Within a radius of 300 feet, he could hear other people's voices more clearly than ordinary people, but it wasn't that exaggerated. Otherwise he wouldn't have been caught by the old emperor hiding behind the bushes. 300 feet is a bit exaggerated. Actually, my skills are slightly weaker than 300 feet. How much is that? 3 feet. Is the distance of a door 3 inches? Li Yi looked at her with some embarrassment and anger. You are a girl, why do you have so many questions? The voice paused and then said, There are no creases on my clothes just now. Here and here lanterns are hung off. Have you invited everyone that should be invited? Check again, who said they can't come? Ask again. If they are sick, then tell them to scram. Drunken Moon Brothel has many guests today. The food and wine will take some time to prepare. What kind of guests are they? Chase them out. If there is a problem with one dish today, they won't be able to open again. What? 20 tables is too many? Just let them do as they say. Can't they just eat one table and throw one table away? All of you be more attentive. If you mess up tonight's matters, then all of you can scram. In the house of High Duke, Qin Chong, the Minister of Ceremonies, did not look like an important official of the court. He walked quickly in the house and shouted without a care for his image. The servants in the house all held their breaths and were very careful. Today was the third lady's birthday, and the second elder had been preparing for it since half a month ago. Not only had he invited many distinguished guests, but the High Duke's public house had also been decorated with lanterns and streamers. At night, the capital city's most famous performers would perform on stage, and there would be no shortage of folk arts and acrobatics. According to the tradition of previous years, the capital city's most magnificent fireworks display would appear tonight. This tradition had been going on for more than 20 years without missing a single year. This was practically the most important event of the year in the House of High Duke. It was even more important than the birthday of the master and the second master. In the Qin family, mistakes in other areas could be forgiven, but today even a small mistake would be met with heavy punishment. After inspecting the house of Qin for the third time, Qin Chong raised his head and drank a pot of cold tea before asking, Where is the third lady? Is she not back yet? A servant of the house of Qin immediately walked up and said, The third lady went out early in the morning and has not returned yet. Qin Chong waved his hand. Send someone to look for her. Don't let anything go wrong today. As soon as he finished speaking, a house of Qin guard hurried over from afar and whispered a few words in Qin Chong's ear. Qin Chong's face immediately darkened. He asked in a cold voice, What did you say? The third lady went to Willow Lane, and that Li Yi was there as well? The guard nodded. Yes, when I found out, I immediately came back to report. The few of you follow me out. Qin Chong ordered coldly and strode out of the house. A group of more than 10 people walked out of the house of Qin, causing some people on the street to stare in shock again. Most people did not know what had happened when the people in charge of the house of Ningyuan yesterday attacked the house of High Duke, but those who were in the know knew very well that even with the Cui and Qin family's persuasion, the house of High Duke still paid a great price to settle the matter. Today, seeing the second master of the Qin family like this, who was going to be in trouble? Chapter 797. At a suitable time, the whole family gathered around to make dumplings, which was a very romantic thing. Although they were not a family for the time being, the four of them sat around the stone table. On Li Yi's side were Miss Qin and Zheng Zumo, and Wan Ruoqing sat opposite him, talking and making dumplings. It was a happy and harmonious atmosphere. Miss Zheng didn't know how to make dumplings. Miss Qin was born in an official's family and had always been the daughter of a rich family. She had never cooked before, but after watching Li Yi and Wan Ruoqing make a few, she soon became good at making dumplings. Wan Ruoqing's dumplings were naturally the most beautiful of the four. Every dumpling was almost exactly the same. Compared with the strange shape of Zheng Zumo's, it was like heaven and earth. Li Yi looked at the results on her table and sighed. If you make them like this, they will all fall apart when you put them in the pot. Who would want to eat them? Zheng Zumo looked at the others' dumplings on the table and then looked at her own. She blushed and whispered, I made them myself. I can eat them myself. Li Yi couldn't stand it anymore. After wrapping one, he directly grabbed her hand and put in the dough and stuffing. Look like this. First knead the two ends, then fold the dough at the back inward and knead them together with the front. Let go of me. Zheng Zumo looked up in panic. Seeing Wan Ruoqing and Mrs. Chen looking at her with a smile, her heart was beating fast, and her face was even redder. She whispered, I learned. Li Yi clapped his hands, looked at her and said, Then you make one and let me have a look. After a while, seeing a dumpling that was even worse than before, Li Yi habitually rubbed his eyebrows and said helplessly, Forget it, you can make it however you want. Xiao Chui, who was watching from the side, laughed out loud. She pointed at Li Yi and said loudly, Li, you have an eye on your forehead. Only then did Li Yi realize that he had forgotten that his hands were still stained with flour. Xiao Chui and Xiao Zhu giggled behind him. Third Miss Qin and Wan Ruoqing also looked at him with smiles on their faces. As for first Miss Zheng, she laughed even more unscrupulously. Li Yi quickly reached out and wiped her face. The corners of his mouth twitched. Keep smiling? Ah. After the scream, the expression on Zheng Zumo's face was stunned at first, then she showed a look of shame and anger. She dipped her palm in flour and pounced on Li Yi, however with her skills how could she be a match for Li Yi? Li Yi tilted his body and dodged her attack. He even wiped the other side of her face and laughed, That's more symmetrical. If I had another one on my forehead, I could directly go to the brothel to sing opera. I'm going to kill you. Wan Ruoqing and third Miss Chen continued to make dumplings, but there were two figures chasing each other in the yard, and there was a lot of chaos. The result of the flower fight was that Wan Ruoqing and third Miss Chen were making dumplings outside, while Li Yi and first Miss Zheng were washing their faces inside. With Li Yi's skills, although he could ensure that he didn't get any flour on his body, he couldn't really do that. If he annoyed first Miss Zheng, his ending would be even worse. It's all your fault. Zheng Zumo took a handkerchief to wipe her face and threw it into the water. She glared at Li Yi and said angrily. She was a woman, but she had actually played with him in the yard just now. Sister Ruoqing was fine because she was used to it. Mrs. Chen also saw it. Wasn't this a joke to her? Li Yi wet the handkerchief, wrung it out and wiped his face. He was very sensible and didn't argue. That's mine. Zheng Zumo widened her eyes and pointed at the handkerchief in his hand. Thinking that this wasn't the first time, she waved her hand and said, Forget it? Then she looked at Li Yi curiously and asked, What's going on between you and Mrs. Chen? Li Yi put down the handkerchief and stood up with a somewhat complicated expression. He sighed and said, It's a long story. The matter wasn't complicated, but it was a bit difficult to talk about it. Although what happened 20 years ago wasn't caused by him, it had an inseparable relationship with him. Every time he thought about the current situation, he felt extremely uncomfortable. How? Zheng Zumo stood there in a daze. Her expression was a bit absent-minded as she murmured, Mrs. Chen, she was a woman in the first place, so she could empathize with her. For a woman, this was such a cruel thing. 20 years ago, Madame Chen was about the same age as Xiao Chui, perhaps even 2 years younger than Xiao Chui. Now, it had already been 20 years. To think that the extremely kind Madame Chen would actually have such an encounter. Her head full of white hair had actually turned white in just one night. Her eyes were a bit moist. She looked at Li Yi and suddenly felt a bit angry. You. Li Yi clarified, Not me. I didn't exist at that time. Zheng Zumo gritted her teeth and said, You men are all the same. Using and then abandoning. Not a good thing. Li Yi shook his head and said, I'll say it again. Some men do like to use and then abandon, but they are them and I am me. I will not use and then abandon. You are. I am not. Yes. Say it again? Yes. Slap. Li slapped her butt. We'll talk about it later? Zheng Zumo was stunned on the spot. A certain part of her body felt numb, but more of it was shame. Her pretty face was flushed, and even the roots of her ears were red. She looked up at Li Yi and said hatefully, yes. Slap. Li looked at her and asked again, is it? Yes. Slap. Yes it is. Slap. 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 No, no, no. The numb feeling came again and again. Her face was so red that it seemed like it was about to drip blood, and her voice was already sobbing. Slap. Another wave of numbness came. She raised her head and looked at Li Yi in disbelief. I already said it's not. Li looked down at her and said with some embarrassment, sorry I hit you casually. Why don't you say, no, again? It was never too late to mend the fold after the sheep were lost. A prodigal son's repentance was more valuable than gold, and there was still a glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel. To be able to recognize one's mistakes was a good thing, and Li Yi still had to learn from Miss Zheng on this point. Miss, why is your face so red? Xiao Cui asked Zheng Zumo in surprise when the two of them walked out of the backyard. Li Yi explained, the water is too hot, and your miss is thin-skinned, so her face turned red. Xiao Cui nodded, not really understanding. She didn't know whether the water was hot or not, but she knew that every time the miss was alone with Li, her face would turn red. Wan Ruoqing looked at the dumplings on the plate and said, it's just the few of us. We're almost done. When Li Yi helped to clean up the tray on the stone table, there was a sudden knock on the door. Open the door. Open the door. Li Yi, don't hide. I know you're inside. Li Yi frowned, dusted off the flour on his hands and walked toward the door. Third Miss Chen was startled and murmured, second brother? At a certain moment the knocking stopped. Qin Chong took a few steps back and looked at the two people who suddenly appeared in front of him. He asked, who are you? The dozen guards behind him also looked at the two warily, as if they were facing a great enemy. One of the men said expressionlessly, I want to ask, who are you and what are you doing here? Creak. The door opened from the inside and Li Yi walked out. Young master. The two men looked at him at the same time and lowered their heads slightly. Li Yi nodded, then looked down and asked, may I know what business you have here, Lord Supervisor? Qin Chong's face was filled with anger. You dare to ask me? Where is my third sister? Hand her over. Second brother. Third Miss Qin hurried out and said, second brother, I'm fine. Qin Chong looked at her nervously and asked, Miaoyu, did this bastard do anything to you? Li looked at him, his eyes narrowed and his fists clenched. He didn't offend anyone, so how did he become a bastard? If not for third Miss Qin being here, he would definitely let this guy know what it meant to be a bastard. Qin Chong glanced at Li Yi, then supported third Miss Qin and said, third sister, let's go. Follow second brother home. The preparations have already been made. We can't leave now. Third Miss Qin shook her head. Qin Chong frowned and said, don't mess around. Hurry and follow second brother home. The guests are all waiting. Third Miss Qin shook her head again and said, Miaoyu just made some dumplings here. Why don't second brother stay and eat some with us? Dumplings? Qin Chong's expression froze. Third sister made them personally? He found it hard to believe. Ever since he was young, his third sister had never done such things. As the daughter of the Qin clan, who would dare to make her do such manual labor? Even as her elder brother, he had never eaten the dumplings she made personally. Third Miss Qin waved her powder-stained hands and said with some embarrassment, I just learned how to make them, so I didn't do it well. Qin Chong stood there in a daze. After thinking about it, he nodded slightly. Then eat some. Chapter 798. Since the third young lady had spoken, Li Yi naturally could not ignore her and shut Chong Chen outside the door. Come in. Li Yi only glanced at Chong Chen and said expressionlessly. Although he was a magnanimous man and did not mind what Chong Chen had said to him, his expression was naturally not pleasant. He was having a good meal here, and this shameless outsider had the nerve to come over? Halfway there he realized that the dumplings had run out. The dumplings made by 4 people were only enough for 4 people and 2 servant girls. With the addition of 1 more person, it was not quite enough. Turning back, he looked at Chong Chen and said calmly, the dumplings are out. Lord Chen, go and buy some more. You. As a dignified minister with the backing of the House of Duke, when had he ever been ordered around like this? Anger appeared on Chong Chen's face. He was about to flare up when the third young lady waved her hand and said with a smile, "I'll ask Xiao Air to buy some. She just bought some and knows the place. Let me go." Chong Chen shook his head. Third young lady had personally made the dumplings. How could the fillings bought by a servant girl compare to the ones he had bought? He was just dissatisfied with the rascal's attitude. After glaring at Li Yi, he strode out. The third young lady took a few steps forward and looked at the two girls. She said apologetically, "I am a guest and made the decision without permission. I hope Zue Mo and Ruoqing will not take it to heart." No. Ruoqing shook her head and said with a smile, "It's just an extra pair of chopsticks." In Li Yi's view, this was not just an extra pair of chopsticks. Every time Qin Chong, this arrogant fellow, saw him, it was as if he was talking through his nostrils. This made him very uncomfortable. However, in terms of rank, a fifth-rank official was 4 ranks lower than him. Who gave him this confidence? If she saw him walking around in front of her, this meal would lose some of its flavor. However, he did not want to make things difficult for the third young lady, so he shook his head and walked to the kitchen. Although they were eating dumplings today, they couldn't just eat dumplings. Other than the main course, they had to stir-fry a dozen dishes and make some soup. Not far from Willow Lane there was a food market. The people of the capital had seen people buying meat stuffing, but they had never seen a mighty group of more than 10 people. The person at the head of the group was dressed in luxurious clothing, and his expression was not angry but dignified. One look and you could tell that he was a high-ranking official. To arrange such a large group to come to the market was just to buy 2 tails of meat stuffing. Heavens, am I seeing things? That person just now seems to be Supervisor Qin. Which Supervisor Qin? There's another Qin informant. The one from Duke Chen's residence. Yesterday he brought a few dozen people to kick down the door of Ning Yuanho's residence. Impossible. What kind of status does he have? How could he come here to buy minced meat? How is it impossible? I saw him with my own eyes yesterday. As the crowd discussed, the butcher shop assistant was already leaning against a pillar in the shop. He couldn't stop himself from sliding down. Duke Chin's Supervisor Qin. These words were enough to make a commoner like him, who had never seen the world, go weak in the knees. Supervisor Qin naturally didn't know and didn't care about the commotion on the street. At this moment he was sitting around the table in the small courtyard. He asked with concern, "Miaoyu, you've packed so much. Are you tired? Do you want to rest for a while?" Zheng Zumo and Wan Ruoqing stood far away on the other side. They withdrew their gazes and looked at each other, seeing the surprise and confusion in each other's eyes. The person who was at Madame Chen's beck and call, asking about her well-being, was he really the current Supervisor Qin? However, when they thought about the fact that the one cooking in the kitchen was a third-rank Dr. Jin Ziguang, a fifth-rank Supervisor Qin didn't mean much. There was another knock on the door. Xiao Chui and Xiao Zhu were busy in the kitchen. Zheng Zumo walked over and opened the courtyard door. "Zumo." Zheng Shichen walked in with a smile on his face. He saw 2 figures he had never seen before at the stone table in the courtyard. He was startled and immediately said, "Are there any guests? I'll leave first then. I won't disturb you anymore. I'll come back tomorrow." He turned around and walked out the door. Only then did a voice come from behind him. "Wait a moment." Zheng Shichen turned around with a puzzled expression. "Is there anything else, Zumo?" Zheng Zumo looked at him with a hesitant expression. She quickly lowered her head and said in a small voice, "Since you're here, let's have a meal before you leave." Zheng Shichen turned around and looked around. When he found that he was the only one here, his body suddenly trembled. He pointed at himself in disbelief and asked, Me? Come in first." Zheng Zumo nodded and slowly walked into the courtyard. Okay. Zheng Shichen stood in place for a long time before nodding. There was a trace of joy on his face as he strode in. The first 2 times he drank a cup of herbal tea, but this time he could even eat a meal. This speed of progress made him feel as if he was in a dream. "Assistant Minister Zheng, why are you here?" An extremely surprised voice rang out in front of him. Zheng Shichen felt that this voice was somewhat familiar. When he looked up, he said in shock, "Official Qin, why are you here?" Seeing Qin Chong here, a trace of wariness flashed across his face. Almost subconsciously, he took a step forward and stood in front of Zheng Zumo. "What are you doing?" Qin Chong glanced at him in confusion, but the expression on his face quickly turned into one of schadenfreude. I only bought 2 ounces of stuffing. If you want to eat, go buy it yourself. Zheng Shichen looked back. Seeing that Zheng Zimo was fine, he finally relaxed. When he turned back, confusion once again appeared on his face. What do you mean, official Qin? Qin Chong glanced at him. What do I mean? If you want to eat, go buy it yourself. There's no extra here. He had long been dissatisfied with the fact that an official of the court was ordered to buy meat stuffing. If he could order around a 4th-rank assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue, he would naturally feel better. Li Yi poked his head out of the kitchen and saw Zheng Shichen standing in the yard. He knew that there was going to be another eyesore today. Zheng Zimo shook her head and said, I'll have Xiao Chui go buy it. Zheng Shichen had already understood the ins and outs of the matter. After seeing Li Yi, his worried heart also relaxed. He smiled and said, since official Qin does it himself, I won't break the rules. I'll go out for a bit and be back soon. Inside the market, the butcher had just walked out of the shadow brought by the official when he saw a customer walk in. Sir, what would you like to order? 2 ounces of meat stuffing, a middle-aged man in a dark robe said. The waiter wiped the cloth around his waist and said, All right, please wait a moment, sir. I'll cut it up right away. Assistant Minister Zheng, is it really you? Hearing the voice behind him, Zheng Shichen turned around and saw the man walking in. He looked left and right and said in surprise, Censor Qi? Since last year, the censors of the Imperial Censorate especially liked to wear casual clothes and wander the streets. It wasn't strange to see a supervising censor in the market. Censor Qi looked at him in surprise. Sir Zheng, what are you doing? Zheng Shichen smiled and said, buying 2 ounces of meat stuffing to make dumplings. That Censor Qi's face revealed a look of surprise. He cupped his hands and said, I really didn't expect that Sir Zheng, as an assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue, would be so thrifty. You must have come to this kind of place in order to sympathize with the people, investigate the prices of goods, and punish illegal peddlers, right? Zheng Shichen's expression froze. Censor Qi was immediately filled with respect. When Sir Zheng was in charge of the Yamen, he still went deep into the people to understand the people's feelings. He is truly a role model for us officials. I will write a memorial tomorrow. Ministry of Revenue, Assistant Minister? Punish illegal peddlers? The butcher stood in a daze behind the stall. His face was pale and his body trembled. The meat stuffing in his hand fell to the chopping board and he fell to his knees. He shouted, Sir, you have wronged me. I am only a worker. About the matter of raising the price of meat? He pointed a finger at the fat middle-aged man behind him. It was all done by my shopkeeper. Zheng Shichen cupped his hands at Censor Qi and said, Sir Qi is too kind. I still have some matters to attend to, so I will take my leave first. Censor Qi also cupped his hands. Take care, Sir Zheng. Zheng Shichen took out a few copper coins and placed them on the chopping board. He picked up the meat stuffing and left without looking at the butcher. The butcher kneeled on the ground. He could only hear the sound of teeth grinding behind him. Wang, go. He turned around and saw that the shopkeeper had taken a boning knife from the wall and was glaring at him fiercely. Raising the price of meat? I will chop you up. Chapter 799. The dumplings were all wrapped up and were just waiting to be put into the pot. Third young Mistress Chen and the 2 maidservants sat in the courtyard and chatted. The chores in the kitchen were almost done. The 2 maidservants could not interfere in the following matters and stood at the back, pouring tea and water. Li Yi busied himself in the kitchen while Qin Chong and Zheng Shichen stood at the entrance of the kitchen, watching. The Assistant Minister of Revenue, Zheng Shichen, still had a look of surprise on his face. He shook his head and said, If my colleagues in court were to find out that the dignified Dean of the Mathematics Academy, Grand Scholar Jin Ziguanglu, is actually doing this kind of kitchen work, I wonder how many jaws would drop. Qin Chong snorted coldly, his eyes filled with disdain as he said, It's clearly an insult to the culture. It's more likely they'll laugh their heads off. Damn it, he had always disliked this guy. Not only did he not make a move, but he was also standing here making sarcastic remarks. Li looked back and said indifferently, Come over and peel off those scallions. Qin Chong sneered. Are you ordering this official? If you don't want to peel it, then please leave. Li didn't even turn his head. I think you're used to living a luxurious life. You probably won't care about a plate of dumplings. Where's the green onion? The corner. After marinating the fish, Li Yi said, If Zheng Darren has nothing else to do, why don't you mash those cloves of garlic into garlic paste? All right. Zheng Shichen readily agreed without any resistance. In the courtyard, Miss Chen looked at Zheng Zumo and said in confusion, Zumo and Assistant Minister Zheng are both surnamed Zheng. Could it be? Zheng Zumo smiled and said, it's all in the past. Third Miss Chen saw that her expression was a little gloomy, so she didn't ask further. The three of them chatted about something else. From time to time, sounds could be heard coming from the kitchen not far away. I asked you to peel the scallions, not to peel them all. Look at the scallions you peeled. What's left? This was Li Yi's angry voice. You dare to shout at this official? Qin Chang's voice was similarly enraged. What's wrong with that? Do you have a problem with that? This official? You have something to say, right? If you have something to say, go out and say it. Forget it, forget it. There are only a few green onions left. There's nothing for you to waste. Go take this trash out and throw it away. What do you mean by, supervisor? You can't do anything right, but you're good at spoiling things. You can only throw trash away. Qin Chong angrily walked out of the kitchen with a dustpan in hand. After taking 2 steps, he turned back and asked, where should I throw it? Wan Ruoqing stared blankly in a certain direction. She hesitated for a moment before asking, there? Third Miss Chen shook her head and said, it doesn't matter. Let them be. It will be more lively this way. She looked at the 2 women with a smile on her face and asked, you must have known that child for a long time, right? Zheng Zumo was confused. Which child? Wan Ruoqing smiled and nodded. We first met in Qing and Fu. It has been almost 2 years since then. While the 3 of them were talking about these things, a fragrant aroma gradually drifted out of the kitchen. Usually there were only the 4 of them in the small courtyard. Most of their meals were at the stone table in the courtyard. If the weather was bad, they would eat inside the house. Li Yi would occasionally eat here, so it wouldn't be crowded with one more person at the table. Any more and it would be hard to sit down. As outsiders, Assistant Minister Zheng and Supervisor Chen could only sit at the stone table outside. This was a special seat for distinguished guests that Li Yi had specially arranged for them. After they sat down, Li Yi took a few bites and then stood up. Everyone eat first. I'll go cook the dumplings. Wan Ruoqing stood up. I'll go help. You guys eat, I can do it alone. Li Yi shook his head and walked toward the kitchen. Third Miss Chen's gaze moved away from the door and asked, does he often cook? He never cares about what outsiders say. When he was in Qing and Fu, he often cooked himself. Wan Ruoqing nodded and asked, is the food to your liking? A gratified smile appeared on Third Miss Chen's face. Even the imperial chefs in the palace are only SOSO. The 3 of them talked for a while. After a while, Zheng Zumo looked outside with some confusion and murmured, why isn't he back yet? I'll go and see. She got up and walked out of the courtyard, heading in the direction of the kitchen. In the kitchen, Li Yi added a fire under the stove and washed his hands in a basin on the side. Then he picked up the bowl and ate the dumplings in the bowl one mouthful at a time. Let's call them dumplings for now. The dumplings made by Miss Zheng looked like dumplings before they were put into the pot. After they were put into the pot, they were a mixture of dough, meat filling, and water. The taste was really the most unique dumplings he had ever eaten. Well done, we're all waiting for you inside and you're actually stealing food here. A surprised and excited voice came from behind. Then Li Yi's wrist was grabbed by someone. Miss Zheng looked at Li Yi with a proud expression as if she had caught a thief who had stolen something. What's stealing food? You're a girl. Watch your words. Li Yi was still holding the bowl in his hand. He said, don't move, be careful not to spill it. It was very rare to see Li Yi embarrassed. Miss Zheng raised her chin and said with a little pride, you were stealing food and I caught you. You still want to deny it? Li Yi looked at her and said, please, stealing food is a matter of 2 people. One person can't do it. Why can't one person do it? Zheng Zumo looked at him with some confusion. As soon as she said this, she understood what he had just said. Her face turned red and she glared at him. She whispered, Lecher, don't worry about stealing food. Li Yi put down the bowl and said, the dumplings are almost ready. Help me bring them in later. Zheng Zumo walked to the front of the stove and said, I want to eat the dumplings I made. You made them? Li Yi shook his head and said, I threw them away. They are all scattered in the pot. How can I bring them up? Zheng Zumo looked at him with some embarrassment. Those were the dumplings she had painstakingly made. Although they were not good looking, it was still her first time. How could he? Her eyes inadvertently caught a glimpse of the bowl that Li Yi had placed on the side, and her expression was slightly startled. Of course there were not dumplings in the bowl. The dough and meat were scattered and there was no dumpling shape at all. The only one that was somewhat similar was a dumpling with 2 round ears, which she had made herself. Her voice softened and she lowered her head, not daring to look at Li Yi. Although she was a little flustered and bewildered at the moment, there was another kind of sweet and warm feeling in her heart. Li Yi took out the bowl and chopsticks, intending to rinse it with water again. He said, "Help me keep an eye on it. When the water boils twice more you can put it into the pot." "Okay." Zhang Zibo nodded and made a vague syllable from her throat. She stood on tiptoe and leaned over to look into the pot. When she made such a posture, her body would naturally bend down in an arc. This familiar arc made Li Yi's hand feel a strange feeling, and his mind couldn't help but recall the scene in the morning. When Zhang Zibo inadvertently turned her head, she saw that he was staring at a certain part of her body. Her body stiffened, and that part seemed to begin to become numb again. Her breathing was a little rapid and she said angrily, "Where are your eyes looking?" "Ahem ahem." Li Yi coughed dryly, looked at the pot and said, "It's about time, let's start the pot." Zhang Zibo's face was blushing. She looked back and whispered, "It's not boiling yet, it's not boiling yet, it's not bad." In addition to the dumplings, the dishes on the table were also very sumptuous. They were originally packed according to the number of people. Li Yi brought out the last bowl of dumplings and said with a smile, "Everyone try the taste first. Delicious." Xiao Chui ate a dumpling. Although it was scalded and kept sucking in air, her chopsticks had already reached out. Her eyes inadvertently glanced at Li Yi, and as if she had discovered something, she pointed at the corner of his mouth and said with a smile, "Li, did you secretly eat in the kitchen just now?" Splash. Hearing the words, "secretly eat," Zhang Zibo's wrist trembled, and the dumpling she had already picked up fell back into the bowl. In the courtyard, next to the stone table, Qin Chong picked up a dumpling, dipped it in vinegar and took a bite. Then he was startled, raised his head and asked doubtfully, "Assistant Minister Zhang, don't you feel that this dumpling is a little raw?" Chapter 800. I think it's okay. Zheng Shichen shook his head. Although official Qin has some old grudges with Marquis Li, what sort of person is he? Why would he use such a method to take revenge on you? I think so too. Qin Chong nodded and swallowed the entire dumpling. Zheng Shichen smiled. He picked up a dumpling, a smile on his face. But when he put it into his mouth, his smile froze. Swallowing with difficulty, Zheng Shichen put down his chopsticks. He looked at Qin Chong and said, "Official Qin, this dumpling seems a little raw." A quarter of an hour later, the two returned to their original positions. Who would have thought that 2 high officials of the court would personally start a fire and boil water for a few half-cooked dumplings? Official Qin, your face, haha, Assistant Minister Zheng is not much better. Let him be, we'll talk after eating. Zheng Shichen picked up a dumpling, dipped it in vinegar and asked, "If I remember correctly, today should be 3rd young Mrs. birthday. Why is Official Qin not at home? Why is he here?" Qin Chong ate the dumpling and said expressionlessly, "After he was released from office, Official Zheng did not return home. Was he observing the people, or?" He looked into the room and said in astonishment, "Could it be that Miss Zheng is Sir Zheng's illegitimate daughter who was left behind by the common people? Speaking of which, why do I feel that between Sir Zheng and her, there is actually, Official Qin, if there is nothing important in the future, do not come here." Zheng Shichen interrupted him. He looked at him and said, "If there is something? Official Qin is the minister of the imperial court and is very busy. Why would he need to come to this small willow lane? Don't you think so?" Qin Chong put down his chopsticks, his eyes narrowing. "Assistant Minister Zheng, what do you mean?" Zheng Shichen put down his chopsticks and met his gaze. "I have a personal relationship with the former Assistant Minister of Justice, Zhao Guangyuan." The former Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Zhao Guangyuan, accepted bribes for personal gain and is still imprisoned in the imperial prison. A dangerous light flashed in Qin Chong's eyes as he said in a low voice, "What does this have to do with what Lord Zheng said? It's very normal for Lord Qin to not admit to this matter. After all, even Assistant Minister Zhao of the Ministry of Justice fell from power in a muddle-headed manner. He did not know that the person behind it was actually Lord Qin." Zheng Shichen shook his head and said, "I have no other intentions in saying these words, I just want to tell Lord Qin." He looked into the room and a hint of warmth flashed across his face. When he turned back, his eyes were cold. "Stay away from drunk ink." Qin Chang's eyes narrowed and he said word by word, "Tseng Shichen, are you threatening me?" "I don't dare." Tseng Shichen's expression had already calmed down. He saluted and said, "Lord Qin has the House of High Dukes behind him. How would I dare to threaten Lord Qin? It's just that Zumo is the only descendant of my big brother in this world. I can't let anything happen to her. Although the Zheng family is small, if Lord Qin insists, the House of High Dukes will not be happy. Your big brother, Tseng Shiji?" Qin Chong glanced at him and murmured, "I see." He picked up his chopsticks again, shook his head and said, "Back then I felt that you were more suitable to be an official than your big brother. Back then, the Zheng family was suppressed and ostracized by the former assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue. Later they were framed and their salaries were touched. The Zheng family's direct line of descent suffered. No wonder, no wonder. Later, the former assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue was found by the Imperial Censorate to have accepted large amounts of bribes and was sentenced to 500 miles of exile. I'm afraid this road to hell is more than 500 miles. Tseng Shichen shook his head and said, "Only Assistant Minister Fang himself knows this." Qin Chong ate another dumpling and said casually, "The Intelligence Bureau has not found out about that matter." "How did you know?" Tseng Shichen smiled and did not speak. "I thought that Lord Zheng had relied on the support of the Chui family and the King of Shu to climb from a small head of the Ministry of Revenue to where he is now. It seems that I have underestimated Lord Zheng." Qin Chong shook his head and picked up his chopsticks. "To express my apology here, a dumpling to you." Tseng Shichen also picked up his chopsticks and nodded. "Thank you, Lord Qin." The invisible confrontation between the two of them had been resolved by these two dumplings. For them, there were some things that did not need to be said. They had already reached a consensus on that dumpling. As Qin Chong ate the dumplings, his gaze would occasionally glance into the room. From here he could faintly see what was going on in the room. Although he could not clearly hear the contents of the conversation, he could still hear the occasional light laughter of the woman. Qin Chong's gaze paused on the face of the white-haired woman. She was currently smiling and talking to the woman beside her. This kind of smile, how long had it been since he had seen it on her face? Even when he held a birthday banquet for her every year that would shake the entire capital in terms of grandeur and grandeur, even noble consort Chui's birthday banquet could not compare to it, he had never seen such a smile on her face. Of course she often smiled, but that kind of smile made him feel even more sad. In the next moment, his gaze landed on the only young man in the room. Tseng Shichen's gaze was also in the room, but it fell on the other woman. Back then, the little girl who only knew how to follow behind him and call him second uncle, had already grown into such a person. In the past, Big Brother often grumbled at him, complaining that he had spoiled her too much, causing his daughter to treat him, this second uncle, more than her father. However, it had been a whole 13 years since he had heard her call him second uncle. Tseng Shichen sighed in his heart, his gaze also turning to that young man. Both of their gazes were extremely complicated. At a certain moment, when the two of them retracted their gazes met in the air. Some things are better left unsaid when there are so many people around. Tseng Shichen finished the last dumpling and put down his chopsticks. Qin Chong picked up another dumpling. "Assistant Minister Tseng, there is no harm in speaking. Lord Qin, what do you think are the chances of the King of Shu succeeding?" Qin Chong's chopsticks were about to enter his mouth, but his body trembled when he heard this, and he put the dumpling back into the bowl. As both core members of the King of Shu's faction, it was very normal for the two of them to analyze the current situation and plan for the King of Shu. However, both of them knew that this time was completely different from the past. Qin Chong said in a low voice, "When the King of Shu was in the capital, his actions had already bitterly disappointed countless supporters in the court. Those who were wavering probably also gave up on that idea." Tseng Shichen continued, "In the future, the School of Mathematics will definitely be heavily relied upon by the court. Minister Qin has said many times that the Ministry of Revenue should recruit more talents from the School of Mathematics. However, in the School of Mathematics, there is no one from the King of Shu's faction. The person in charge is Prince Jin. After the accounts were checked, the King of Shu and the Chui clan's power in the court was almost completely wiped out. Their arrangements over the decades were destroyed in a day. The Chui clan's foundation was almost destroyed by foreign merchants. They could not interfere in the matter of the School of Mathematics, and they have lost the support of the people. Prime Minister Qin's attitude has been ambiguous recently. The most frightening thing is His Majesty's attitude. The eldest princess is temporarily in charge of the court, and the King of Shu is not allowed to return to the capital for noble consort Chui's birthday. But if the King of Shu is defeated and a new emperor takes the throne, what will happen to the Qin clan and the Zheng clan in the future? The voices of the two of them became softer and softer, and their expressions became darker and darker. In the hall, Li Yi brought over a bowl of longevity noodles that he had personally cooked. He smiled and said, "I wish you a happy birthday." This kind of birthday greeting was extremely hasty, but Third Miss Chen's face was full of smiles. She took the small bowl from his hand and held his hand. She nodded and said, "Good, good." Chapter 801. Duke Chen's Residence. Although night had yet to fall, the entire Qin residence was filled with jubilation. The residence was decorated with lanterns and colored banners. Guests arrived and chatted with each other. Servants and maids walked among them, serving delicacies and wine. The atmosphere was joyous. To the Qin residents, today was even more lively than the New Year Lantern Festival and Mid-Autumn Festival. This lowly official greets Lord Qin. Today there is only Qin Qing, not Lord Qin. Long time no see, congratulations on your promotion, Lord Qin. Today is my youngest sister's birthday, let's not talk about these things. Sit over there, Lord Qin, welcome. Cui Lu, bring Madame Qin to the ladies in the inner courtyard. The Qin family's status in the imperial court was not low, and it could even be said that it played an important role. This was not only because of Minister Chen's prestige and connections in the past, but also because the Qin brothers held important positions in the imperial court. One was a minister and the other was now an official's attendant. Anyone who was invited to today's banquet more or less had the intention to curry favor with them. Qin Qing personally welcomed a few important guests, then turned around and frowned. What time is it? Why haven't third sister and second brother returned yet? A servant replied respectfully, Master, second master went out to fetch third miss a long time ago. I don't know why, but there has been no news yet. The banquet is about to begin. Send someone out to take a look. Yes. Qin Qing gave an order and the servant immediately retreated and ran out of the mansion. In Willow Alley, third Miss Qin walked out of the courtyard and smiled at the two girls. I still have to thank you for your hospitality today. Sorry for the trouble, one Ruoqing bowed slightly and said, You are too polite. It is just a simple meal. Although it is simple, it is better than all the luxurious clothes and food. Third Miss Qin looked at Li Yi who was standing at the back. After a long time she said, It is getting late. We have disturbed you for so long. We should go back. Be careful. Qin Chong helped her down the stairs and looked back at Li Yi. His brows were still furrowed, but there was no longer the intense hostility from before. Drunk ink, I'm going back too. Zheng Shichen smiled, then turned and walked towards the entrance of the alley. When this assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue and Minister Chen parted ways at the mouth of the alley, they looked at each other again. After exchanging some information they got into their respective carriages. In the courtyard, Li Yi and Zheng Zumo sat on either side of a stone table. Seeing this third young lady again today made his heart feel uneasy again. The Qin family had always been the most solid force of the King of Shu's faction. It was also a force that he and the eldest princess could not avoid in the future. However, the Qin family was different from the Cui family, the Yu family, and the Qin family. The Li family owed third Miss Qin too much. Since ancient times, conflicts between factions had always been cold-blooded and heartless. However, if they really used unscrupulous means to achieve their goals and caused her to suffer even a little more harm, even if their ultimate goal was achieved, they would never be able to live in peace for the rest of their lives. This matter needed to be discussed at length. Zheng Zumo put a cup of tea on the table in front of him, looked at him and said softly, Are you still thinking about Mrs. Qin? Li took a sip of tea and nodded slightly. She thought about it and said, This matter is not your fault. Li shook his head. But it is still related to me. Fang's head had poked in twice from outside. Li looked up and said, It's getting late. She nodded. Well, you can go back. I have a lot of things to do in the next few days. I may not have much time to come. Rui's due date was less than 3 months. Li did not intend to let the old lady and the other women take her to pray for Buddha's blessing all day. After a pause he said, If there is anything urgent, send someone to find me. The new house is not far from here. You should know where it is, right? Wait a minute. She was stunned and hesitated for a moment. Then she turned around and walked quickly back to the room. Soon she came out and handed something to Li Yi, saying, "It's not good. It's not as good as Sister Ruoqing. If you don't like it, throw it away." Li Yi looked at the baby clothes in his hand. It was indeed not as good as the one made by Ruoqing, but compared with the one she made before, it was like heaven and earth. Her needlework was just like her culinary skills. It was incredible that she could make such great progress in such a short period of time. It was enough to guess how much effort she had put into this area these days. Let me see. Li Yi grabbed her left hand and sure enough, there were quite a few dark red spots on her white jade-like fingers. This time she did not struggle. Seeing his slightly distressed expression, a smile appeared on her face. The dull pain in her hand did not hurt so much. At the door of the room in the back, a figure had come out. Seeing the situation in the courtyard, he slowly retreated. Li Yi was a little touched and angry. He sighed and said, "Don't be so silly in the future." She shook her head and said, "It's never wrong to learn more things. Besides, in the future I have to do a few things for my child." "That's true." Li Yi nodded and said, "But you have to be careful. No one is like you, hurting your hand when making clothes. Anyway, it's still early. If you do it slowly, there will be a lot of clothes. It will save me the trouble of buying them outside." She slightly lowered her head, feeling a little disappointed. Yes, the only thing she could do was to sew a few small clothes for him and Miss Lu's child. She subconsciously wanted to withdraw her hand from Li Yi's hand, but he held it even tighter. Li Yi looked down at her and asked, "Do you want to have a son or a daughter?" "I think a daughter is better, but it's not up to us. When the time comes, it still depends on luck." Hearing this, her body trembled and then her face immediately turned red. She struggled even harder to break free from Li Yi's hand. Who wants to have a child with you?" Li Yi could only see the back of a panicked fleeing figure. He said helplessly, "Why are you running?" In the future, not now." Some things were vague. It would indeed save a lot of trouble if it was not said or poked through the layer of paper. But this was very unfair to her. As a man he was a little less responsible. The timing was not very right. But in the coming days he had a lot of things to do. It would be difficult for them to meet again. Li Yi thought for a long time and still felt that it was better to say these words. "Miss, why are you covered in the blanket? Is it very cold?" Inside the room, Xiao Chui stood in front of the bed and looked at the figure who was curled up in the blanket. She listened carefully and heard a low sobbing sound coming from under the quilt. "Miss, are you crying?" Panic immediately appeared on her face and she said anxiously, "Did Li bully you?" "Miss, don't cry. I'll go find him now." "Don't." A figure quickly jumped up from the bed. Zheng Zimo grabbed Xiao Chui's arm, and her face was full of tears. She shook her head repeatedly. "Don't go, it's not his fault." "It's me," Xiao Chui asked doubtfully, "but miss, why are you crying?" Because. She looked out of the window in a daze, then held Xiao Chui in her arms and whispered, "Because today's dumplings are too delicious." The young girl's face revealed an extremely surprised expression. She cried like this because the dumplings were delicious. In the past 10 years she had never realized that the young miss actually liked to eat dumplings so much. In the courtyard, a figure sat at the stone table in a daze, looking at the full moon that had already risen into the sky. There was a smile on his face and his clear eyes were like a pool of green water, but there were sparkles flashing in them. Fang sat in the carriage and looked back at the carriage. He sighed and said, "Son-in-law, you're so wise. It's too troublesome to have a boy and have to raise him up to marry him. I also think it's better to have a daughter." Chapter 802. "Husband, you came back a little later than usual today." In the room, candlelight flickered. Li Yi moved the wooden basin away, helped Rui dry her feet and covered her with the quilt. Then he said, "I was indeed delayed by something today." He roughly told Rui what had happened that day. Rui leaned against the headboard and curled her feet under the quilt. She said, "Speaking of which, I haven't seen Mrs. Chen for a long time." Li Yi sighed. He didn't know what to say for a while. "I'm just a woman. I shouldn't say anything." Rui looked at him and said, "But I think that in the future, no matter what happens to the Li family and the Chen family, we must treat Mrs. Chen well." Li Yi nodded. The complexity of this matter couldn't be explained in a few words. He gently picked up Rui, laid her on the bed and covered her with the quilt. He said, "It's getting late. Go to bed early, my wife." Rui nodded and closed her eyes obediently. Good night, husband. Good night. Li kissed her gently on the forehead. He walked over to turn off the light and left the room. The moon was very bright that night. There were lanterns hanging in the courtyard, so it wasn't very dark. Li took some desserts from the kitchen and a pot of grape wine. He sat at the stone table in the courtyard. He had cooked a lot today, but he didn't eat much. He was a little hungry now. He ate the desserts and drank the wine, thinking about something. Many things had happened these days. He needed to think about them from time to time. The most important thing was to find another job for old Fang. With a grandmaster like Su Lao by his side, his existence seemed a lot more unnecessary. Secondly, since the old emperor handed over the affairs of the court to the eldest princess, he really didn't care about anything. He moved to Hibiscus Garden with the Empress, Yan Fei and the others and retired early. According to the eldest princess, he actually asked the imperial guards to open up a vegetable garden in Hibiscus Garden. He had already planted the seeds himself. When spring came next year, he would be able to eat the vegetables he grew himself. Other than that, he played on the streets with Shanning and Yongning every day under the protection of a group of hidden guards. He led the dogs up the mountain to chase rabbits and set traps to catch pheasants. Of course, he didn't chase them himself. Li was starting to wonder if things really turned in the opposite direction when they reached an extreme. The old emperor had been working hard his whole life, but in his old age, he had completely let himself loose and neglected his duties. If this went on, he would not be able to keep his chastity. However, after staying away from the affairs of the court, he went to bed early and woke up early every day. Even the frequency of his illness was reduced. Li didn't remind him too much about this. Winter was coming, and at that time he would have to obediently stay in Hibiscus Garden like a turtle. Winter was the season of asthma. If he survived this winter, there would be hope for the next year. Li was also worried about the eldest princess, who was personally in charge of the court affairs. Although she often participated in the court affairs, it was the first time that she was acting in the place of the emperor. There would be too many problems in the process. Therefore, during this period, whether it was Li entering the palace or the eldest princess leaving the palace, they were very frequent. Moreover, apart from the court affairs, the two of them had other more important things to discuss. Of course, these things were secrets only the two of them could know. They couldn't let others hear about it. Li Xin couldn't and the old emperor couldn't. Besides, there was something else, about himself. For him, compared to other things, this matter was more troublesome. Mississippi Lu, who was wearing a thin shirt, came over and sat opposite him. She pinched a piece of pastry and poured herself a glass of grape wine. She was very busy these days and often didn't eat at home. There were not many opportunities for the two of them to sit quietly and face each other like this. When she poured the second glass of wine, she slowly said, "I'm out of silver. Take 100,000 taels first. We'll talk about it if it's not enough." Lu Ming was his family's power. Li wouldn't be stingy on spending money on this. He gave her the silver and she could do whatever she wanted. She didn't expect him to be so straightforward this time. Mississippi Lu looked at him in surprise. Rui, Li thought for a moment, suddenly sat up straight and looked at her. "I have a question to ask you." Mississippi Lu pinched another piece of pastry and said lightly, "Speak." "I have a friend," Li looked at her and said seriously. "This friend of mine has encountered some troubles recently." Mississippi Lu looked at him calmly and waited for him to continue. Li looked at her and continued, "This friend of mine has fallen in love with a woman. That woman is very good, but he has a wife. His wife is very gentle and beautiful. He also loves his wife very much. This friend of yours, don't tell me his surname is also Li?" Mississippi Lu suddenly looked at him and asked. Li nodded and said, "It's just a coincidence." "A coincidence? This friend of yours, other than that woman, has a lot of women outside?" Li thought for a moment and counted with his fingers under the stone table. He shook his head and said, "Not a lot. It's also a coincidence that this friend of yours, other than his wife, has a powerful and beautiful wife's sister and a lovely servant girl?" Li shook his head. "Ah, how can there be so many coincidences? Whose coincidences are they?" Mississippi Lu lowered her head and poured another cup of wine. She asked, "Are there any other questions?" "None." Li stood up and turned to walk 2 steps. He then turned back and said, "The night is cold. Don't sit for too long. Rest early, morning dew hall." After His Majesty left the palace, although Her Highness the eldest princess had been acting as the court's administrator, she did not live in the hall of diligent government. Usually, the memorials sent by the minister of Shangshu would be sent to the palace where she lived. You have to continue following up on the matter of paper making. But I think it should be done soon. In 2 days' time, Li spread out a piece of paper and wrote and drew on it. Lowering the price of paper is a good thing for the scholars of the world. It is also a sharp weapon to rope in the scholars. The academy has already begun preparations in the various provinces. When the time comes, there will naturally be people who will publicize what you have done in the capital. Once these two things are done, it will almost be enough to win the hearts of the scholars of the world. Continue to send people to the Yu family every day. They will definitely continue to raise the price of paper. When the price reaches a certain level, they will definitely be tempted and start to stock up. Because if the academy uses that price to buy their paper, the entire operation of the academy will collapse. They will kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Of course, we will definitely not let them kill 2 birds with 1 stone. After the new cheap and good quality paper is released, the Yu family's paper mill will collapse and the paper they have in stock won't be sold. The Yu family. It just so happens that winter is coming. We won't starve to death with the Cui family. We will have company and won't be lonely. After listening to him, Mingzu nodded, but her face showed some confusion. She looked at Li Yi and asked seriously, Can I really do it? Li looked around and moved closer to her. He said in a small voice, Don't think about these things now. What we need to do now is to let His Majesty know, let all the civil and military officials know, that what His Majesty can do, you can also do it and you can do it better, even better than all the previous emperors of the past dynasties. This is something that happens subtly. We already have a lot now. Even if we encounter some resistance in the future at that time, that little bit of resistance won't be a big deal. Li had also seriously thought about it. Compared to the legendary figure, the eldest princess, whether it was her identity, position, or the power in her hands, was much greater. It could be said that she was truly a good seedling. The only thing she lacked might be that kind of temperament and means. Of course, he also did not want the eldest princess to have that kind of temperament and means. She only needed to be responsible for completing the task given to her by His Majesty and being as beautiful as a flower. As for other things, there was him. Chapter 803. Is the Princess Royal in? Li Xian stood at the entrance of the morning dew hall and asked a palace maid. After getting an affirmative answer, he walked in. These days, Mingzu was sometimes in the palace and sometimes at Li Yi's place. If he wanted to see her, he had to rely on luck. This was not the most depressing thing. The most depressing thing was that no matter where they were, she and Li always seemed to deliberately avoid him when they were talking about things. He had accidentally bumped into them a few times. The two of them were originally having a serious discussion, but when they saw him, they would immediately change the topic. The last time they actually said that they were talking about whether the crown princess would give birth to a boy or a girl, and even asked him if he liked a son or a daughter. Needless to say, of course he liked a son. But if it was a daughter, it was fine because it would be his child. This was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that between the two of them, one was his best friend and the other was his family. This feeling of being ostracized by the people closest to him was very uncomfortable. There must be something hidden in this that he did not know. He opened the door and saw the two people in the room. After a moment of shock, he smiled and said, "You're both here. The new paper has been made, it's very good." "Oh yes, what were you talking about just now?" Because the two of them were talking about something secretive, Li Yi deliberately stayed very close to the Princess Royal. When Li Xian pushed the door open and entered, he had no time to react at all. He secretly glanced at the Princess Royal. At such a close distance, she should have been able to sense it. Mingzu lowered her head. She had been absent-minded for a moment, and when she realized it, it was already too late. Li looked at Li Xian, then looked at Mingzu and asked, "Yes, what were we talking about just now?" Mingzu looked at him and said, "The soup you brought today was very delicious, let's continue tomorrow." Li Yi's face was full of regret. "I was going to bring another kind of soup tomorrow. It's even more effective." Li Xian stared blankly at the two of them. When he came in just now, the two of them were so close to each other. When they turned around to talk to him, their faces were almost touching. Now they were actually telling him, what soup were they discussing just now? What kind of soup did they need to stand so close to each other? The two of them had been behaving strangely lately. They had been hiding together all day, a man and a woman alone, cheating on each other, a man and a woman together in a room acting sneakily, and not letting him know what they were discussing. There was definitely nothing good about it. "Why are you asking so many questions?" Li glanced at him. Just now, what did you say about the paper creation? No, you have to make it clear to me today. Li Xian didn't seem to be so easy to fool this time. He looked at the two of them with a sullen face. Originally, it was a matter of the three of them together. Suddenly, one day he was pushed out. The three heroes of the capital had become the two heroes of the capital. This kind of feeling could not be understood unless one experienced it personally. Li looked at him. He didn't know what to say. Of course, it was impossible to tell the truth. This was no small matter. Even Li Xian couldn't know about it. He couldn't even think about it in that direction. This reason was not easy to come up with. In Li Xian's mind, he couldn't help but think about the various states between Li Yi and Mingzhu over the past few days. Or rather, signs as well as their intimate appearance when he came in just now. At this moment, Li Yi and Mingzhu seemed to have thought of something. One of them was stuttering, and the other was lowering her head in silence. A thought flashed through his mind. Could it be? He looked at the two of them suspiciously. Li Yi's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't have guessed this kind of thing. Mingzhu's face also showed a trace of unnaturalness. Li Yi's nervousness and Mingzhu's panic naturally didn't escape Li Xian's eyes. Seeing this scene, his heart was almost certain of his guess. He blurted out, "Could it be, there's something going on between the two of you?" Li Yi's expression froze. What? And Mingzhu raised her head to look at Li Xian. Still pretending, still pretending? Li Xian looked at the two of them with a face full of agitation. He had an expression that said, "Stop pretending. I knew it. There's definitely something going on between the two of you." Li looked at him in a daze. "No, when we were in Qing'an Prefecture, I knew that the two of you, sooner or later. Don't mess around. Have you settled your wife? Have you settled your sister-in-law?" I've settled those two. And Uncle Huang. And Mingzhu is the eldest princess. It's difficult to settle the etiquette." Li Yi had never seen Li Xian so agitated. He couldn't even get a word in. Then he thought of something. He didn't have many opportunities to meet with the eldest princess, and he also had to be on guard against Li Xian at all times. What could he do to get past this hurdle and make him pay more attention in the future so that he wouldn't be so reckless? It seemed like there really was. So he held the eldest princess's hand and sighed. His face showed helplessness. "You also know that Mingzhu is the eldest princess." He looked at Li Xian. His expression was slightly gloomy. "So, if we want to be together, it's as difficult as ascending to heaven?" Li Xian hurriedly said. "Don't be discouraged. You don't look like someone who gives up easily. Let's think of a way together. It should be possible." Li Yi's tone was sad. "So, we can only be together for such a short period of time when we are discussing politics." Although it was hard to lie to him like this, he didn't have any conscience. But it was better than letting him know the truth. A white lie was worth forgiving. The eldest princess also understood his intention at this moment. She quietly let him hold her hand. In Li Xian's view, this was a kind of floating and sinking according to the man. Otherwise, with Mingzhu's temper, she would only hold a man's hand. It was impossible for her to hold his hand. "I know. It's not easy for you. I'll leave now." Li Xian nodded fiercely to show that he understood. He turned and walked outside without any hesitation. "Forget it. I still have business today." Li grabbed his arm and pulled him back. He asked, "You just said that the paper has been made?" Li Xian looked at them again and then said, "It has been dried. The quality is really high and the cost is so low. Once it is launched, the Academy's problem can be solved." But he thought of something else and asked doubtfully, "Of the two types of paper you made this time, one is of high quality and low price. It will definitely be recognized by the world, but the other, it is very soft. After you use ink, it will immediately permeate. You can't write on it, you can't draw on it, and you can't use it to wrap things. Why did you waste so much effort to make this inferior paper?" Li glanced at him and said, "Why do you care why I made this paper? Since it has been made, it must be of great use. Otherwise, what is it used for? To wipe my ass?" Li Xian looked at him disdainfully. "Vulgar. Let's not talk about this." Li looked at him and said, "I've taught you the basic method of paper making. Now you have a certain understanding of the principle of paper making. You can use this knowledge to take a small step forward." "Oh," Li Xian asked doubtfully. "The paper for writing has been made. It shouldn't be difficult to make waterproof paper and fireproof paper. I'll give you 3 days. Is that enough?" Li Xian's eyes widened. "Waterproof paper and fireproof paper? Why? Is 3 days too short? Li thought for a moment and said, then 5 days. 5 days is enough. If it's longer, I may not want to eat paper-wrapped fish so much. Li Xian shook his head vigorously. As the saying goes, paper can't contain fire. This paper will also become useless in contact with water. How can you make the 2 kinds of paper you mentioned? Haven't I already taught you the basic method of paper making? Besides, you are in the field of science. Don't say the word impossible so easily. Li walked to the door of the hall and seemed to think of something. He turned around and said, by the way, about me and Emingzu, don't worry, I won't tell anyone. Li Xian said in a daze. Then he counted with his fingers and said loudly, also, impossible is 3 words. Chapter 804. In the small courtyard of Willow Lane, Xiao Chui held her chin with one hand and stared straight at the door. She murmured, Miss, Lily hasn't been here for a long time. Zheng Zumo was spreading the osmanthus flowers she had just picked yesterday on the stone table to dry. After the osmanthus flowers were dried and ground into powder, they could be stored until this time next year. The fragrance filled the courtyard. She didn't answer Xiao Chui's question. Instead, she moved the ones that had just been sun-dried to a place where the sun could shine. Miss? Xiao Chui stood up and trotted over. She asked, Miss, why aren't you in a hurry? What's the hurry? Zheng Zumo glanced at her and sat back down at the stone table. Why isn't Lili here yet? The servant girl only felt that her young miss was really silly. She anxiously said, did you 2 quarrel? Otherwise, why hasn't young Master Li come here for so long? Young miss, at this time you can't throw a tantrum. Young Master Li is such a good person. Okay. Zheng Zumo waved her hand and said, his wife is about to have a baby. He is taking care of it at home. Of course he doesn't have time to come over. Don't think too much all day. Oh, so that's how it is. Xiao Chui nodded, her heart finally relaxed. Zheng Zumo looked up at her and asked, what did you say about me just now? Petulant? I'm not. Xiao Chui ran over and shook her arm. Miss is the best. Wan Ruoqing, wearing an apron, came out of the kitchen and asked with a smile, Zumo, didn't you say you wanted to learn how to make osmanthus cakes from me? Come in. Zheng Zumo stood up and pointed her finger at Xiao Chui's forehead. Then she turned around and walked quickly to the kitchen. Is it difficult to make osmanthus cakes? She was full of confidence before, but after walking into the kitchen she was a little worried. Wan Ruoqing smiled and said, it's not difficult to make, but it's not easy to make it delicious either. Osmanthus powder, noodles, water temperature, kneading time, steaming time, and the size of the fire will more or less affect the taste. Zheng Zumo's eyes widened, and her face revealed a dispirited expression. It's over. I can't do so many things. Wan Ruoqing shook her head and said, as long as it's you who did it, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. What are you talking about? Zheng Zumo blushed and said, I just want to learn and cook for myself in the future. All right. If you say it's for yourself, I'll make it for myself. Wan Ruoqing smiled and said, although the process is a bit complicated, fortunately there is still a lot of time. After trying a few times, I will naturally be familiar with it. What do you mean I'm making it for myself? That's what I meant. Okay. I'll make it for you. But before that, I have a question to ask you. Why are you acting so mysterious? What's the problem? Say it. Does drunken Emo like boys or girls? Zheng Zumo was startled and immediately blushed. Seeing the teasing look on Wan Ruoqing's face, how could she not know that what they said that day had been heard by her? She said angrily, good, you dare to laugh at me. She reached out to tickle the other, and Wan Ruoqing dodged and fought back. After a while, the 2 women were flushed. Zheng Zumo panted slightly and said, no more. Let's get started. Wan Ruoqing nodded, and a smile appeared on her slightly haggard face. However, in this smile, there was a hidden trace of loneliness, desolation, and sourness. Zheng Zumo, who was full of joy and sweetness, did not notice it. The maids of the Li family had been very frightened in recent days. They were specially assigned by the old lady to take care of the young madam, but it had been half a month, and they could only do things like wiping the table and sweeping the floor. The Marquis's care for young madam could be said to be meticulous. He was so meticulous that they could not interfere at all. He was so meticulous that other than cooking personally, he even chased them away from things like combing hair and washing feet. What made them sad and even a little frustrated was that the hair that Master Ho combed for the young madam was much more beautiful than theirs. Even the maids who were the best at this could not compare. For a woman, wasn't the happiest thing in life to marry a husband who was willing to spoil her, love her, and take care of her in every possible way? Even if this husband did not have any great ability, it was enough to help each other for a lifetime. And Master Ho could no longer be described as great ability. He had great ability. The youngest duke of the Jing kingdom, the youngest minister of Golden Ziguanglu, and the most favored official of His Majesty, the more capable Master Ho was, the more precious the things he did for the young madam were. Their marquis was far from being comparable to the group of coquettish, cheap and powerful nobles outside. "All right, husband, there's nothing else for me to do here. Husband, please go back to your work." Inside the room, Rui looked at Li Yi and said helplessly, "It's nothing." Li Yi shook his head and asked, "Are you hungry? Do you want me to peel an apple for you? The Wang family of Luochuan just sent it over this morning. It's better than the offerings sent to the palace." "Oh, you're not hungry? Then are you thirsty? The soup is almost ready, I'll go get you a bowl." "I'm not thirsty." "All right, then you rest first. I'll be in the courtyard. Call me if you need anything." Li Yi closed the door, walked into the courtyard and sat opposite Mississippi Liu. Mississippi Liu was reading a newly published Wuxia picture book. Li Yi asked casually, "Do you have enough money?" Mississippi Liu turned a page and her eyes didn't move away from the picture book. She said, 100,000 taels is enough for a long time. My previous investment can be gradually recovered now, and I won't need so much in the future." After all, he was concerned about her. Her casual attitude was a bit too much. Li Yi frowned slightly, looked at her and said, "Hey Rui, when you speak, can you look at others? This is the most basic respect, right?" Mississippi Liu was stunned when she heard this and then nodded. She closed the picture book, raised her head and sat up straight. She looked into his eyes and said apologetically, "Okay." After receiving Mississippi Liu's apology, Li Yi nodded in satisfaction and asked, "Where were we just now?" "Oh, Lu Ming's investment has paid off." Mississippi Liu showed an expression of interest. She looked into his eyes to show respect and asked, "Speaking of your friend with the surname Li, has his matter been resolved?" "What are you talking about? Don't always talk about others behind their backs." Li Yi stood up and said, "There's something going on at the school. I'll go take a look. You stay at home and take good care of your sister." There was nothing going on at the school. As the vice dean and dean, Li Han would take care of all the matters at the school. However, he was still young, just over 11 years old. If the position of dean was really given to him, the old emperor and the court officials wouldn't feel at ease. Therefore, although he was now exercising the authority of the dean, he still had to wait for a few years to take over the position. There was a small grassy slope at the back of the school. In order to protect the lawn, neither students nor teachers were allowed to go up there. Of course, the dean was not included. At the back of the grassy slope, where they couldn't see, Li Yi and the eldest princess sat side by side. It was not an easy task to be in charge of the affairs of a country. Even a martial arts master had limited energy. She looked a little tired and didn't speak. She just crossed her knees and lowered her head, listening to Li Yi. The Yu family should also know that the paper price they offered can't be higher. If it's higher, your people don't have to agree or it will be too fake. There's also news from the paper mill. They really have started to stock up. Let's wait a little longer. The word live, that I told you last time? Li Yi only said a few words before he felt a slight weight on his shoulder. He turned his head and saw the eldest princess leaning on his shoulder. She had actually fallen asleep. Li Yi stared blankly for a moment, then sighed softly. It seemed that she was really tired. Whether this kind of life was good or bad for her, he didn't know. He didn't move again and let her lean on him. He looked at the sparkling lake in the distance and thought about something else. At the bottom of the grassy slope, a figure walked up quietly without making a sound. Li Xian crawled up the grassy slope and looked down. When he saw the figures snuggling up to each other, he nodded slightly and slowly climbed back down. Chapter 805. The Academy of Sciences really can't make waterproof and fireproof paper. Li Xian looked a little haggard. It was obvious that he had been thinking about this matter for the past few days. It seemed that he really had no clue. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given up so quickly. If you can't make it, then forget it. At most, I won't eat paper-wrapped fish anymore. Li shook his head and said, Emingzu is very busy these days. Keep a close eye on the paper mill, especially the method of making paper. Don't leak it. Also help to take care of the people from the princess's residence. Li Xian nodded and said, Don't worry, I'm watching. Speaking of Emingzu. Li Xian turned to look at him and hesitated for a moment before saying, I know it's not easy for you, but Emingzu is tired enough dealing with political affairs. You should control yourself and take care of your health. Li looked at him in surprise and asked, What should we control? Anyway, just control yourself. Look at how tired she is. Watching Li Xian turn to leave, Li shook his head and murmured, Strange. Fearing that he would forget, he reminded him again, Insist on visiting the Yu family. Got it. Li Xian waved to the back and walked out of the gate. The Yu mansion. A steward of the Yu mansion said to the middle-aged official sitting on the chair with a bitter smile, Sir, it's really not that we don't want to help. It's just that the paper mill of the Yu family just received a few big orders before the new year. We really can't spare any extra people. The middle-aged official thought for a moment and said again, If the Yu family is willing to provide this batch of paper to the academy first, the price can be increased by 1 liter. This? The steward looked embarrassed. He thought for a moment and said, Sir, please wait for a moment. I'll go and inform the master first. Not long after, Ningyuan Ho Dingfeng personally saw the official of the princess's residence out and said, Sir, rest assured that what the princess is doing is good for the country and the people. The Yu family is also doing our part for the country. Thank you very much, Marquis. I will take my leave first. Farewell. Seeing the official leave, a strange smile appeared on Yu Dingfeng's face, and he walked back into the mansion. Father, are we going to agree to the princess just like that? A young man came from afar and followed him. He asked anxiously, How are we going to explain this to the Cui family and the king of Shu? What do you know? Yu Dingfeng glanced at him and said, The demand for paper in the academy is so large that no one but the Yu family can afford it. Since they are offering such a high price, why don't we do it? If this large sum of money is used on this, I want to see how their academy will operate in the future. If their academy can't continue and we get the money for nothing, not only will noble consort Cui not blame us, but this matter will also be a great merit. The young man was startled for a moment before a look of reverence appeared on his face. Father is wise. Yu Dingfeng waved his hand and said, All right, stop flattering me. Tell me what's the matter. Nothing can be hidden from father. The young man smiled embarrassedly and said, Third brother has been reflecting on himself in his room for half a month. Mother sent me to ask when. Don't mention that bastard to me. Hearing him mention this matter, Yu Dingfeng's face was filled with rage. If it weren't for that blind bastard provoking that person from the Qin family, that madman Qin Chong wouldn't have come knocking on their residence to denounce them. The Yu family had paid a heavy price to settle this matter, and even now, he still felt his heart ache when he thought about it. I said 1 month, so it's 1 month. Not a day less, not even an hour less. Yu Dingfeng said with a sullen face. He then asked, Have you found the prostitute from that day? The young man lowered his head and said, Not yet. When I found the brothel, I heard that she redeemed herself on the same day and left. As for where she went, I don't know. Yu Dingfeng's face became even more sullen. Even now, if he still did not know that the Yu family had been schemed against, he would not be fit to be the head of the Yu family. Half a month ago, after listening to the bodyguard's detailed account of what had happened that day, he realized that the appearance of that woman and the words she had said were all meant to lead that unfilial son into a conflict with that person from the Qin family. That was why Qin Chong had come knocking on their door. It was clear that someone had schemed against the Yu family from behind. Although he did not know who the mastermind was, he had to settle this score with the Qin family sooner or later. Originally, after knowing the identity of the other woman in the cloth shop that day, he still had many misgivings. After all, the youngest golden Ziguanglu of all the dynasties was not a person who was easy to get along with. Fortunately, after so much time had passed, that person had not made any moves. Perhaps, he had already forgotten about this matter? Yes, he must have forgotten about it. When Li Yi walked out of the school of mathematics, Li Xian chased after him and asked after listening to him, Has the Yu family agreed? Li Xian nodded and said, They just agreed. Should we release that paper now? No hurry. Li Yi waved his hand and said, Let them stock up more goods first. Originally there was only a small grudge with the Yu family, but it had been half a month, and with the interest the small grudge had long become a big one. Bullying Emingzu and Zuemo only made them lose money, which was not a big deal. After all, although the money was gone, at least the people were still there. When passing by a brothel, he asked Su to stop the carriage. This brothel was the core of all the brothels in the capital. Usually, all the matters of the brothel would be gathered here. If Ruoqing was not in Willow Lane, she would be here most of the time. County Marquis Li? When walking into the brothel, a voice came from behind. Li Yi turned his head and looked at the middle-aged man who came in from outside. The middle-aged man in luxurious clothes took 2 steps forward, smiled and said, "It's really County Marquis Li." Li Yi's eyes swept over the man behind the middle-aged man, then he looked at him in confusion and asked, "You are?" "I'm Qin He." The middle-aged man smiled and said, "Prime Minister Qin is my father." Li Yi made an obeisance with one hand in the other before his chest. "So it's Lord Qin. You flatter me." The middle-aged man said with a smile, "I'm the 5th child in the family and I have no official position. I'm just an ordinary man." "County Marquis Li, you also come to the brothel to watch the show?" "I'm just watching." Li smiled and asked casually, "I wonder what show Lord Qin is watching this time?" "The Orphan of Zhao." Lord Qin smiled and said, "This show is really good. I don't know who wrote it. It's the 3rd time I've watched it." Li Yi said in surprise, "It turns out that Lord Qin likes to watch this kind of show of enduring revenge." Lord Qin shook his head with a smile and said, "I'm just watching, just watching." Li Yi chatted with this 5th master of the Qin clan for a while before the latter entered a railing. Li Yi stood outside for a moment before withdrawing his gaze and walking towards the small building inside with familiarity. Inside the small building there were several women busy. Seeing Li Yi come in, they hurriedly got up and saluted. "Young master, are you looking for Miss Ruoqing? She's upstairs." Li Yi nodded to them with a smile, walked up the stairs and gently knocked on the door of a room. "Come in." When Li Yi pushed the door open and entered, Wan Ruoqing was writing something at the desk. Without raising her head, she said softly, "Recently there have been 2 new shows and the repertoire needs to be rearranged. The costumes should be ready soon and I'll go and urge them tomorrow. The 2 brothels in the east of the city are a little understaffed and need to be transferred. You're here." There was no sound coming from the door. She raised her head and glanced at it. After a moment of surprise, she immediately stood up. Li Yi walked over slowly and said, "You don't have to personally arrange these trivial matters. The people below can also do it." Wan Ruoqing smiled and said, "I have nothing to do, so I'll just do what I can." "How many times have you said it, but you've never listened?" Li Yi looked at her, shook his head and said helplessly. When talking to her, she had always been so gentle and soft. She was truly a woman as gentle as water. No matter how impetuous he was, he could quickly calm down after spending a short time with her. When he passed by here, he came to see her and talked about some things about the brothels. He didn't know how many times he had told her to rest more and not to be too tired. Then he refused her offer to send him downstairs and left. Above the small building, a gentle gaze through the window watched him walk out of the brothel, and stopped at the place where his figure disappeared. The figure leaned against the window and stared blankly, until the sky darkened. Chapter 806. In the hibiscus garden, the warm sunlight shone on the square in front of a palace. Jing Emperor was basking in the sun while rocking his chair comfortably. He smiled as he looked at the children who were playing and running in front of him. It was not until he was tired that he yawned and asked, "How's the matter at the academy?" Standing in the sun like a pole, motionless for half an hour, the figure finally moved and said, "Although His Highness is busy with government affairs every day, he has never neglected the matter of the academy. Now the academy in the capital has already started construction. The 5 states near the capital have also begun the construction of their respective academies. However, His Highness seems to have encountered trouble in another matter." Changde said a few words and Jing Emperor frowned slightly. "The Yu family?" Changde nodded and said, "I am afraid that the Chui family is behind the Yu family. After all, if the academy is really implemented in the long run, it will shake the foundation of the aristocratic families. The imperial court's paper shops are distributed to various yamens. They can't take out too much to give to the academy. The Yu family is indeed a problem." Jing Emperor thought for a moment and asked, "How did Emingzi deal with it?" "His Highness sends people to discuss with the Yu family every day. It seems that they have just reached an agreement, but the price is a bit too high. Jing Emperor looked puzzled and murmured, "This is not like Mingzhu's style of doing things, and it is not like that boy. What is Li Yi doing recently?" "His wife is about to give birth. These days he has been attending to her." "What a good-for-nothing guy." Jing Emperor waved his hand and said, "The scenery in the hibiscus garden is pleasant, and the weather is good today. Go and call the three of them over. I haven't seen them for a long time." The arrogant Lolita, who was approaching from behind, immediately gave up the idea of scaring her father. She hurriedly ran over and asked, "Father, is teacher coming over?" Jing Emperor nodded and said, "Father is busy today. Shanning just said that she wants to go out to play. Just bring more guards. Remember not to make trouble." "When did she say that she wanted to go out?" After getting a positive answer, the arrogant Lolita said in a sweet voice and immediately ran back. Emperor Jing asked in confusion, "Where are you going?" I didn't even wash up this morning, so of course I have to dress up and change my clothes." By the time her voice could be heard, she had already disappeared into the back of the hall. "When did this child become so vain?" Emperor Jing said doubtfully. He waved his hand and said, "Ask the catering company to prepare today's banquet." Just as Li Yi was about to leave, a eunuch came to his door and said that His Majesty had summoned him to Furong Garden. After finding out the cause of the matter, he learned that the eldest princess and Li Xian had also been summoned, so he didn't think too much about it. In any case, he also planned to enter the palace to discuss matters with the eldest princess, so going to Furong Garden was a bit closer. The net had already been cast. After all these days, the fish had already entered the net. It was time to reel in the net. Of all the surnames, it had to be this one. The family was unfortunate, the family was unfortunate. When he went out, Fang ran over from a distance and said, "Son-in-law, where are you going?" "I finished the things you gave me a few days ago." Li was surprised and said, "So fast?" Fang nodded and said, "Next time you can leave these small things to others. These days I didn't even have time to take care of the shops in the city." "All right, get in the car." Li waved his hand. These days without Fang it was much quieter. However, he couldn't let him keep doing those unimportant chores. He only hoped that he could sum up the experience and learn from it. When he arrived at Furong Garden, Li Xian and the eldest princess had not arrived yet. Seeing that rocking chair, Li Yi felt a little distressed. The ruler of a country came to snatch a rocking chair in broad daylight, and didn't even get a tael of silver as compensation. Was there still law in this world? The old emperor lay on the rocking chair and asked directly, "What are you going to do about the academy?" "What about the academy?" Li Yi was surprised and said, "Isn't it always the eldest princess who deals with the academy?" "I don't know." Emperor Jing glanced at him and said, "All right, Mingzhu is a straightforward person. How could she think of such a sinister idea? Don't think that I don't know that it's all your ideas. Last time in the Imperial Garden, I heard everything." "I'm sorry, I forgot." Li Yi smiled awkwardly and then said doubtfully, "Your Majesty, you were just talking about the academy. The academy has been doing well recently." "Nothing has happened." Emperor Jing frowned and said, "Then the Yu family?" Li Yi looked puzzled and asked, "Which Yu family?" "Ningyuan Ho." Emperor Jing had just opened his mouth when he saw Li Yi's expression. He was startled and seemed to understand something. He nodded and said, "The Yu family has made contributions to the country in the past. Don't kill them." Li Yi shook his head and explained, "Your Majesty, you misunderstood me. I didn't intend to kill them, father." The eldest princess came from behind and bowed to Emperor Jing. "I'll take my leave first." It was better for an outsider like him not to know about the discussion between Her Majesty and the retired emperor. Li Yi sensibly retreated. He still had to eat here later, so he couldn't leave for the time being. Fortunately, the scenery in Hibiscus Garden was good. He planned to go to the lake to enjoy the scenery. After a few steps, he stopped and stared blankly in front of him. Not far away from the intersection, a proud Lolita wearing a white palace dress stood there charmingly. Li Yi was slightly surprised. The proud Lolita usually liked to wear brightly colored clothes and wore her hair in a double spiral bun. The flying fairy bun was the favorite hairstyle of young girls. Today she wore a white palace dress and her hair was combed back into a heart bun. At first glance she didn't look like a crazy girl at all. At this moment, Li Yi truly felt that the 14-year-old Princess Shanning was no longer the proud Lolita from before. "Sir." She stood there with her hands clasped together and said something in a low voice. Li came back to his senses and walked over. He asked, "Where's Yongning? Why isn't she with you?" She lowered her head and said with a red face, "Yongning has to go to class today. I'm not feeling well, so I asked for leave." "You're not feeling well?" Li looked down at her and asked with concern, "What's wrong? Have you seen the imperial physician?" The proud Lolita lowered her head and looked at her toes. She whispered, "I feel uncomfortable for a few days every month. There's no need to see the imperial physician." Li didn't know how to respond to this question. The little Lolita had really grown up. In the past, she liked to hold his hand when she walked and would often cling to him like an octopus. Now that they were walking side by the lake, she wasn't as noisy as she used to be. She became exceptionally quiet, which made Li feel a little uncomfortable. Sitting on the lawn by the lake, the proud Lolita softly talked about some interesting things that happened to her in the academy. For example, no matter what kind of chess they played, she had no match in the academy. Another time, when the mathematics teacher punished her friend, she asked Li Han to come up with a few questions to ask the mathematics teacher. In the end, the female teacher didn't come to class for 3 days. Li Xian and the eldest princess walked over from afar. Li Xian looked at the two of them and squatted down. He said, "Bing Ning, come with Brother Xian. Brother Xian will give you something fun to play with." Brother Xian, I've grown up. I don't play with those things anymore." Although the proud Lolita was unwilling, she was still dragged away by Li Xian. Li lay comfortably on the grassy slope. Below him was a small lake. The lake water was dark green. The wind blew from the surface of the lake, bringing a refreshing coolness. This kind of weather was actually very suitable for barbecues or picnics. It was a pity that the old emperor had already arranged a banquet. Mingzu sat beside him. She bent her legs and looked at the lake. She seemed to be thinking about something, and her gaze was slightly absent-minded. Li Xian walked over from afar and said, "I'm afraid that the two of you will attract suspicion if you're alone. It'll be better if I'm here." He took out 2 pieces of dough from his sleeves and stuffed them into his ears. He looked at Li Yi and said, "Don't worry, I can't see or hear anything. You guys can continue chatting." After he finished speaking, he walked to a place 10 feet away from the two of them and lay down on the ground. At the same time, in a palace somewhere in the courtyard, a girl in a white dress lay on the bed. She crossed her legs and swayed unconsciously. She flipped through the pages of a book and muttered, "The book says that girls should be reserved, but teacher doesn't seem to like it." That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.